Multiples are called vertices. Always get them confused because it's got an S on it as well. It's like vertices, vertexes. It's not vertexes. Gradually bring the top left-hand options again. You got to have it like that. Maybe this middle part, sort of like this. Okay. And I'll do another one here, something like that. Okay. Oh, that's a little lopsided. It's a little bit repetitive of what's on that side. And this is maybe a little bit too far. Just sort of playing it by eye. But I have to keep this for the rest of the donut, for the rest of the tutorial. So I'm trying to do it well. Okay, and something else, by the way, another hotkey. You can see that if I want to move this up, if I was to move it like this, right? It's moved everything also left to right as well, okay? Because of my camera angle, okay? If I'm looking at something like this and I'm moving it, it is moving it across the donut. So it's scrunching everything going this way. That's not what I want. I want it to go directly up. So it means I have to get my camera angle like right down here to do that up. Alternatively, a better way, not to throw too many hotkeys at you, get my keyboard shortcuts if you haven't already, link in the description. But another hotkey is Alt-S, which instead of moving it just arbitrarily, this will now move it according to which direction those faces are pointing. And this is actually perfect for this exact case because we've got, points, rounded around it. And it's just, it's tedious to have to get my camera angle exactly right when really I just want to be able to select certain parts and then pull them in and out. So Alt-S allows me to do that. The shrink and fatten tool is what it is called. But other softwares, I think they call it move along normals or something like that. Something like that. All right. And then maybe the base as well. I think we should make it a little bit lopsided on the base. Move that down. Something like that. Now there is a sculpt tool, which we'll talk about when we get to the icing. That could also do this, but that is not the point of this tutorial. So I'm just doing proportional editing because, to be honest, like this proportional editing is perfect for this kind of thing. Yeah. Cool. So it's just entering into edit mode to do your changes, going into base as well. I think we should make other softwares, I think they make it a little bit lopsided on the base. And then maybe like that called them in and out. So angle exactly right. When really I just want to be able to select certain parts and then pull them in and out. So Alt-S allows me to do that. The shrink and fatten tool is what it is called. But other softwares, I think they call it move along normals or something like that. Something like that. All right. And then maybe the base as well. I think we should make it a little bit lopsided on the base. Move that down. Something like that. Now there is a sculpt tool, which we'll talk about when we get to the icing. That could also do this, but that is not the point of this tutorial. So I'm just doing proportional editing because, to be honest, like this proportional editing is perfect for this kind of thing. Yeah. Cool. So it's just entering into edit mode to do your changes, going into object mode to see how it looks, and then swapping back out with tab again. And that's really all it is. I think this is too thick on this side now. Too lopsided. I went too far with the imperfections. But that also comes into like the style of it, of what you're doing. Yeah. Something like that. Oh, by the way, another side point I just mentioned, we're talking about object and edit mode, okay? A big problem a lot of beginners have that I find is that later on, you'll be like, I'll say, all right, so select your lamp and your camera or something like that. And they'll be like, oh, I can't click on it. What's happened? It's because you are still in edit mode, okay? Edit mode means you cannot click on anything else other than the object that you are editing. You're still in this. When you switch back to object mode, you're now able to click on any object in your scene, but in edit mode, it is locked to that view. So if you can't click on things, just remember, check what mode you're in. You're probably in edit mode. Switch to object mode and you'll be fine. Okay. Just to finish on something completely random, because why not? Just throw it in there just as a little Easter egg for those of you that made it to the end of the video. is something cool. If you go to select, there's an option there for select random, and this will just select at random vertices on your mesh, and then you've got a little of you that made it to the end of the video. Is something cool. If you go to select, there's an option there for select random, and this will just select at random vertices on your mesh, and then you've got a little ratio thing you could change down the bottom there. Then, if you used Alt-S, you would basically make a lumpy looking donut. So it's kind of like a quick way. If you wanted to make a lumpy looking donut, you could do it that way. And also if you change the fall off type, okay, so this is that ring, that little circle that goes around it, right? If you changed it from the smooth one to sharp, then you would make it something else, like a spiky warped donut. I don't know. It actually looks better without the subsurf and like flat. It's like, no, it does not. Okay, I don't know what I was thinking with that. Anyways, all right, just something random to finish on. Okay, so play with your donut, get something that you like, and then join me in the next part as we do the icing. So click here, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. To make renders like these, you need high quality assets, which is why I'm going to do. So enter into edit mode, and we want to select half of our donut. So if we went into, you can see that, like if we looked at it from this, you know, if we drew, you can see we're missing part of it, right? Because it's like, this is one of those cases, is what I'm trying to say, where you need to use straight on. Okay, so, or number pad 1, number pad 3, whatever you want to do, something like that. Okay, and by the way, when you use this, it also switches you to orthographic mode. Okay, so perspective mode is where you've got the depth fall off. Okay, and then orthographic mode is when it is like as if it was like on a focal length of like infinity. So you're seeing like the actual, what's the best way to describe it? No perspective, essentially, zero perspective. And you can toggle between that, by the way, also with a number pad 5 or by clicking this little gizmo on the right-hand side there at any point. Doesn't have to be in a certain view. Okay, cool. So if we were to just drag over this right now, it looks like we've got half of our donut. However, if you moved around, you would see we're missing the other half of it, okay? And that's because it's hard, okay? The mesh is hard, and therefore to select on the other side of it, we have to be able to see through it. And we can do that by going up here and toggling X-ray, or the hotkey for that is Alt-Z, and that will now show us right through it. And now when we drag over it, you can see that we've got exactly the top half of our donut all the way around. Okay, perfect. So we want to duplicate this and then separate it. Okay, so I'm going to hit Shift D, or you can go up to Mesh and then click on Duplicate, wherever that would be. Right there, duplicate at the top. Yeah, but Shift D. Okay, now when you do that, you can see that it is now locked onto my cursor, okay? And it's telling me, where do you want to place this duplicate? And I don't. I want to leave it exactly where it was. So if I hit Escape or right-click, it's going to cancel the movement and put exactly where it was, but it has now duplicated it. Now what we want to do is move this to its own object, because you can see that we've now got vertices on top of vertices, and they need to be their own separate objects. So to do that, the hotkey is P. P for part of the mesh. Go to another, I don't know. It's P. For whatever reason, it's always been P. And we're looking for selection. So separate by the selected part of the mesh. Okay. And now in object mode, if we switch out of X-ray mode, you can see that we now have two objects, and actually we can see them up here in the outliner as well. Okay. And now just very quickly, because I know that some of you will have just messed up accidentally, and you are now screaming at the screen, oh no, how am I going to fix this? When you did this step, you duplicated it, you right-click to cancel it, and then you accidentally did a single click. If you clicked something else, you've now got mesh on top of a mesh, and you don't know which vertex is which, like which is the one that was the one that you just made, right? Or which one is the actual donut. So if you ever run into this problem, what you can do is to select only things that are connected, because these are no longer connected, right? There's bits that are not connected. It's Control L, or just mouse over it and then just hit a single L. L for loose parts. Is it? I don't know what it is. Link. Oh, it's linked. Okay, select linked. There you go. Then when you do that, you can actually, find the right part of your mesh. Okay, so now I've actually just got just my donut and then just my icing. Fantastic. Okay, so up here in the outliner, you can see two objects, and it's probably a good time to name it, okay? So you can name it by just double-clicking in the outliner, and we can call it icing. Another way to name it is if you've just got your object selected anywhere in your 3D viewport. It's the same hotkey as Windows renaming files. It's F2, and I can now type in donut, and there we go. So two things, and we could organize it however we want. Cool. So our icing is currently looking like a skin tight something. It's got to have some thickness to it, okay? And we can do that with the modifiers. Okay, so going over here to your modifier stack again, we are looking for something called the solidify modifier right here. Modifier stack again, we are looking for something called the solidify modifier right here. There really needs to be a search function for the modifier stack, but there's just a lot here at the moment. So solidify, okay. Now when we do this, you might not have actually really seen much change. If you went into wireframe mode, which you could do by hitting Z and then dragging to the left to go wireframe, or up here, so this is solid view mode, this is wireframe mode, okay? In wireframe mode, we're able to see just the raw mesh without any faces. You can see that it looks like a donut within a donut, but it's got thickness to it, but it is pointing it in the wrong direction. So this offset, this is wireframe. If you went into wireframe mode, which you could do by hitting Z and then dragging to the left to go wireframe, or up here, so this is solid view mode, this is wireframe mode, okay? In wireframe mode, we're able to see just the raw mesh without any faces. You can see that it looks like a donut within a donut, but it's got thickness to it, but it is pointing it in the wrong direction. So this offset setting here from -1, we want to change that to 1. And now go back to solid view. Okay, so that is like a doona of ice. It's got thickness to it, but it is pointing it in the wrong direction. So this offset setting here from -1, we want to change that to 1. And now go back to solid view. Okay, so that is like a doona of icing. It's a lot. So we're going to turn our thickness down to be something a little more reasonable. And by the way, when you're dragging these values here, here's a tip. You can see that it's like really hard to control because subtle movements is what I need, but it's moving it by a lot. If you hold down Shift, that is not incremental. What is it? Smooth movements? Subtle movements, yeah. Anyways, holding down Shift when you need to use small numbers. And Control, by the way, will snap it to increments. So I use that actually quite a lot. So yeah, Shift for smooth movements and Control for incremental, or both. Like subtle and incremental. Anyways, all right, I'm giving you all the hotkeys and everything at once. I hope it is not too much for you. All right, I'm gonna go for like something like a 0.0015 of icing, because I want it to look somewhat thick, but like not too thick. Okay. Now, something to keep in mind is that this edge here, it looks kind of weird for a lot of reasons. If we went into flat shading mode, you can see that it's created like a hat, a hat on our donut, okay? And the reason for that is the order of our modifiers here. So a modifier is, what is the best way to think of it? Well, it's working from top to bottom. That's how we'll describe it. Okay, modifiers are fantastic because at any point we can change these settings. It is a non-destructive way of working. This subdivision settings that I had before, I think it's too high. So I can come in here and I can change these settings, okay? Make it lighter. If it was not, if I was to apply it or I did it a different way, I could not change those settings. Non-destructive, it is fantastic. It also means that, it's working from top to bottom. So what I want to do is move this above my subdivision, which I can do by just dragging these dots at the top here, just dragging that up, And you can see that now it's doing the, if I just turn that off, it's doing the thickness part first, and then it is smoothing it, which means that that edge there that was like this before is now being forced to go like this because of the subsurf, because it adds those points and then it kind of averages them out, which is, yeah, how subdiv works. There we go. Cool. So now, I don't know, now that thickness doesn't look like enough. So I'll just increase that a little bit. And I'm going to go shade smooth again. Okay. Lovely. Well, we made good time. Yeah, let's just jump to the next video. We're actually going to start modeling in the dripping parts of our icing in the next part and doing a little bit of sculpting as well. So click here to join me in the next part, and I'll see you there. Join over 1 million 3D artists who use Polygon's models and textures to help them make better renders. Then you can see the solidify modifier again. So that's what we want. Okay, so if I was to move this down by hitting G, oh, I got to turn on my screen keys tool because it's turned off. There we go. If I move this down with G and then went back to object mode, you can see that we've got something that looks like a little droop, a little dribbly bit. So you can guess we are going to be doing quite a bit of that. I'm going to turn on proportional editing, as you could probably guess, so that now when I move down, I can scroll up, or no, scroll down and increase the fall off, and now I can create a big dribbly bit. But you'll notice that straight away, there's a couple of problems. Okay, so for one, this bit is sticking straight out, and then also this bit of our icing is clipping through the donut, which would require a whole bunch of fixing and like manually going in there. It's not good. So it would be great if we could make it snap to the face underneath. And there is a feature just for that. Okay, so the snapping tool is right up here. Okay, this little magnet icon. Okay, now quick just overview of snapping. Snapping, you can always, whether you go up there and like turn it on or not, you can always temporarily enable it by holding down Control. Okay, so this default is set to increment. So if I'm moving an object, rotating, scaling, that's transforming. Okay, so it's snapped during transform. If I'm moving it, if I just hold down Control as I move it, I am temporarily restricting its movement to the grid floor underneath it, basically, because that's the increment that it's looking at. Okay, so I can only move it when I'm holding down Control to that. And that is the exact same thing as if I was to check that, turn that button on, and then move it without hitting Control. Okay. So there's no difference between holding Control or not holding Control. It functions the exact same way. It's just that this way lets you do it without having to hold Control, basically. But that's also another good point, because there's a hotkey for it. I can't remember what it is, but you sometimes hit it accidentally without realizing, and then you're like, why can't I move things properly? Like it's all messed up, and that's actually a common beginner question. Why can't I move things? Just check that that's not turned on. Just check, yeah, because it's probably turned on. Anyway. Okay, so coming back to our donut here, we want to make sure that that's turned on, and I want to change it from snap to increment to snap to face. Okay, and now that I do this, you can see that if I grab this edge here, sorry, that point there, and I just move it down, you can see that part of it is this edge here at least, or this point, is now snapping to the face, okay? But this part is not, okay? So there, okay. I'll try not to say that too much. There is a function for this. Underneath snap to project individual elements, which doesn't explain anything really. Like there's no way you would know that this is the button to push. There's really no clue that that's what to do, but it is. If we check that, now when we use our proportional fall off, anything that falls in the proportional fall off area will now also snap to the face underneath it. And that is how we do it. Now we can do whatever we want here. We can move this around, we can do whatever, and we can make our donut icing look like icing, and it will automatically snap and form the shape of the donut, which is perfect. Now, I've learned from doing donuts many, many, many times. I've made more virtual donuts than probably perfect. Automatically snap. Move this around, we can do whatever, and we can make our donut icing look like icing, and it will automatically snap and form the shape Like that. You can see the difference. These other sections over here. So on the right hand side, this is your properties. And as you can imagine, it's the properties of things in the 3D viewport, or the this tutorial series together as a whole. Now, by default, your proportional size, it's, I guess the word's exponentially. Yeah, try and make it always one, roughly much always. I want to do is apply the scale, because and this is another thing you would never know if you're a beginner, but it's sort of a running joke in the 3D world. But like anytime you run into a problem with your mesh, something's not working, apply the scale. Because if your scale is wrong, other things tend to perform wrong, like modifiers and other things like that. So this scale here should pretty much always be 1 if you can, yeah, try and make it always 1, roughly speaking. So to apply your scale, you go Control A and then hit scale. Okay, so Control A for apply and then scale. And now it is 1. Nothing has changed, but it just means things will work better in the future. And I'm just doing it because I know I'll forget it, and then they'll be like in the comments and people go, why is mine messed up? And it was because of this part I didn't say hit. Anyway, all right. Okay, so how do we get rid of these jagged lines? Because that's probably your next question. How do we get rid of those jagged lines? There are two types of shading in Blender, or in Join over 1 million 3D artists who use Polygon's models and textures to help them make better renders faster. Join for free at polygon.com. Congrats on not giving up yet. It's always fun. Whenever you release a multi-part tutorial series, it's just fun seeing like the viewership drop after every part as people quit. So if you did make it, hey, you're staying on track. You haven't given up yet. No, I do hope that you can. So we've now got 2 windows. Okay. Area will now also snap to the face underneath. Know that this is the button to push. There's really no. Modify. So in your modify stack over here, if we just uncheck to make renders. Now, something to keep in mind is that this edge here, it looks kind of weird for a lot of reasons. If we went into flat shading mode, you can see that it's basically, it's created like a hat, a hat on our donut, okay? And the reason for that is the order of our modifiers here. So a modifier is, what is the best way to think of it? Well, it's working from top to bottom. That's how we'll describe it. Okay, modifiers are fantastic because at any point we can change these settings. It is a non-destructive way of working. This subdivision setting that I had before, I think it's too high. So I can come in here and I can change these settings, okay? Make it lighter. If it was not, if I was to apply it or I did it a different way, I could not change those settings. Non-destructive, it is fantastic. It also means that, it's working from top to bottom. So what I want to do is move this above my subdivision, which I can do by just dragging these dots at the top. Join over 1 million 3D artists who use polygons, models, and anything that falls in the proportional fall-off area will now also snap to the face underneath it. And that is how we do it. Now we can do whatever we want here. We can move this around, we can do whatever, and we can make our donut icing look like icing, and it will automatically snap and form the shape of the donut, which is perfect. Now, I've learned from doing donuts many, many, many times. I've made more virtual donuts than probably actual donuts I've ever eaten. I've learned that it's better if you work from reference. Okay, so go to your Google. The actual donuts I've ever eaten. Do whatever, and we can make. I'll try not to say that too much. There is a function for this. Underneath Snap to project individual elements, which doesn't explain anything really. Like there's no way you would know that this is the button to push. There's really no clue that that's what to do, but it is. If we check that, now when we use our proportional fall off, anything that falls in the proportional fall off area will now also snap to the face underneath it. And that is how we do it. Now we can do whatever we want here. We can move this around, we can do whatever, and we can make our donut icing look like icing, and it will automatically snap and form the shape of the donut, which is perfect. Now, I've learned from doing donuts many, many, many times. I've made more virtual donuts than probably actual donuts I've ever eaten. I've learned that it's better if you work from reference. Okay, so go to your Google Images and type in donut icing and then just find an image. Doesn't really matter which one, but like something that you like, okay? If you like the look of it, like this like extra dribbly one, you could get that. I happen to like this one here. Just save the image, put it somewhere, put it on your desktop, and then I'm gonna show you how to bring this into Blender. So we want to split our window here, and you can do that one of two ways. One is to go basically over the edge, a divider of a window here, until you get those little arrows there so that you could change the size of this, right? And just right click there, and then you can say vertical or horizontal split. So, whoops, oh, that did nothing. Vertical split. Ta-da. So we've now got two windows. Another way to do it is to go to the top right-hand corner of your screen until you get, oh, that did nothing. Vertical split. Blender. So we want to split our window here, and you can do that one of two ways. One is to go basically over the edge, a divider of a window here, until you get those little arrows there so that you could change the size of this, right? And just right click there, and then you can say vertical or horizontal split. So, whoops, oh, that did nothing. Vertical split. Ta-da. So we've now got two windows. Another way to do it is to go to the top right-hand corner of your screen until you get, there's no button for it, but your cursor becomes a little target pointer thing. And if you just click and drag to the left into it, it will now split the view. If you click and drag to the right, it will now join it. And that used to be the only way you could make extra windows in Blender. You just had to know to do that. There was a little like fold thing there, a little extra window. It will now split the view. If you click and drag to the right, it will now join it. And that used to be the only way you could make extra windows in Blender. You just had to know to do that. There was a little like fold thing there, but anyways, it's kind of an old thing that they've kind of kept because it's pretty handy. So anyways, once I've split the view, this could be anything. So this is a whole bunch of all the features of Blender, and it goes deep. The one we're looking for is Image Editor, which allows you to, guess what, just bring in any old image. So this is the one we're going to do. Okay, now I want to start to model some of the shapes here, and it should result in a far better one than if I just went by eye, because it's one of those lessons you learn that you always think you know how something looks, and then you get to the end and you go, it doesn't look really good, and then you go, oh, I should have just used a reference photo because it's totally different than what I imagined. I want to get a t-shirt that just says reference, 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 because it's like my biggest piece of advice for artists whenever they ask for feedback. I'm like, just look at reference. You got it wrong. And I do it wrong myself. Anyway, so to make this gloopy bit, you probably see that if I like grabbed one of these pieces and I like moved it down, it looks jagged. There's not enough detail here to create that bit. So what we need is more detail. So I am going to apply our subsurf, okay? So to apply anything, it's best to put it before put it to the top, because that's essentially what it's going to do. It has to apply it, and then it's going to be reading from the top anyway, roughly. So I put it to the top, and it's okay. We'll fix this edge after. To apply the subsurf, that's essentially what it's going to do. It has to apply it, and then it's going to be reading from the top anyway, roughly. So I put it to the top, and it's okay. We'll fix this edge after. To apply the subsurf, if we go to this little drop-down arrow and then hit apply, or you can just hit Control-A while hovering over this, it will apply whatever is in the viewport amount, not the render amount, but the viewport amount. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'll just hit Control-A or hit apply. And now, whoops, why is that? Okay, all right. You can see that we now have double the amount. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'll just hit Control-A or hit apply. And now, whoops, why is that? Okay, but the viewport. Amount. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'll just hit Control-A or hit apply. And now, whoops, why is that? Anyway, roughly. So I put it to the top, and it's okay. We'll fix this edge after. To apply the subsurf, if we go to this little drop-down arrow and then hit apply, or you can just hit Control-A while hovering over this, it will apply whatever is in the viewport amount, not the render amount, but the viewport amount. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'll just hit Control-A or hit apply. And now, whoops, why is that? The viewport amount. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'll just hit Control-A or hit apply. And now, whoops, why is that? Okay, all right. You can see that we now have double the amount of our of vertices on it. I'm temporarily hiding the donut, by the way, which you can do by hitting, you can hide anything temporarily by hitting H, and then Alt-H will bring anything back again. So if you just need to temporarily get something out of the way, H, and then Alt-H. Okay. But yeah, somehow this is like, I don't know, it's like clipping through it, which we could, it's odd that that's happening. You can see that if I just like randomly click here, that I'm going to bring this through. Yeah. There is another way, which I'll show you. We're going to use a shrink wrap modifier next, but I want to do this in order to just sort of show you, sort of like the problem-solving way of doing things. But anyways, all right, let's find where it was I was going to make that gloopy bit. It doesn't really matter. I can just do it right here. Okay, so I'm going to make a little bit that goes down in order to just sort of show you, sort of like the problem-solving way. Odd that that's happening. You can see that. But yeah, somehow this is like, I don't know, it's like clipping through it. Which we could, it's odd that that's happening. You can see that if I just like randomly click here, that I'm going to bring this through. Yeah. There is another way, which I'll show you. We're going to use a shrink wrap modifier next, but I want to do this in order to just sort of show you, sort of like the problem-solving way of doing things. But anyways, all right, let's find where it was I was going to make that gloopy bit. It doesn't really matter. I can just do it right here. Okay, so I'm going to make a little bit that goes down. This bit over here, this bit can go down even further, like that, right there. And then this, I'm going to use to pull down. Now, if I pull, so there's a bug in Blender. I believe it's a bug because it's only happening occasionally. And it didn't happen in the last version of Blender. Pretty sure this is a bug just because I'm using the beta version of 3.0. But for some reason, it is selecting the, like, through my mesh, which should not happen. But it's happening right now, and it's very irritating. So I'm going to have to report the bug after I finish recording this. But anyways, it just means I have to be careful. If I pull this down, you can see that yes, oh, the other thing I wanted to do after the solidify modifier now is add another subsurf modifier so that we get that smooth edge back again. Okay, but if I move it down, it looks, it's a little too stretched. Okay, so you want to try and go as far as you can, but at a certain point you need extra mesh. Report the bug after I finish recording this. But anyways, it just means it looks, it's so that we get, the other thing I wanted to do after the solidify modifier now is add another subsurf modifier so that we get that smooth edge back again. Okay, but if I move it down, it looks, it's a little too stretched. Okay, so you want to try and go as far as you can, but at a certain point you need extra mesh. You need to sort of break this line to create extra parts of the mesh. So the way to do that is to extrude. So if I select part of my mesh here, let's say 3 points like that, and I hit E, that will extrude. So I now get extra faces, extra vertices. And because this is turned on, it should also automatically snap to the face underneath it. And I'm going to do it again. Let's just make an extra long gloopy bit. Okay, so you can see that is a totally different look, right? You've got this bit that is now like free flowing down there rather than feel like it's like stretching an edge. So modeling is, I mean, that's really like a big part of modeling is understanding topology and like where to, add more detail where you need it and where not to, etc. I'm just pinching these in, by the way, by grabbing 2 points and then hitting S. But yeah, I'm trying to keep this fairly simple for this tutorial. Okay, so I've got that little bit there. Now let's do another little bit that goes next to it. So I'll grab this bit, I'll move this down. Let's grab 2 points. Just make this a short little gloopy bit. Or will it be? Yeah, that looks a little bit weird, actually. It's so odd that bug has happened. I've never seen that bug before. Bugs get fixed surprisingly quickly in Blender, by the way, if you're curious. they are hard to come across because with an open source software like Blender, like so many people are using it and so many people are reporting bugs that, yeah, it is surprisingly more stable than 3ds Max Maya. I say that now and like people will be raging in the comments. No, it's not. It's you know, but I'm pretty sure that's like fairly well agreed upon in the community. But anyways, not to toot Blender's horn because it's definitely not perfect, but it does seem to be fairly stable. That's one of its great points. All right, and you know what? I might make another little gloopy bit over here. You know, I don't want to make this, you know, these parts too long, but I do want to make this look good, and I want to show you sort of the thought process that goes into it. Because some people will then go like, why does his donut tutorial take, you know, why does it take 6 hours to make a donut? Well, it doesn't. But I can do it really quick if you want, but you won't learn anything. Anyways, now I'm making on the other side of the donut, let's say over here, like a really big gloopy bit that goes down. But so far down that it's going to extrude another piece down. Hitting E to extrude it down, and then I'll scale that in by hitting S. And let's just move this up and around. All right, that's pretty good. And then I'll make this bit next to it, because that seems to be a common thing. When you've got one gloopy bit, there's another bit that's right next to it. I don't know if that's true or not. Just sort of making it up as I go. Okay, cool, awesome. Well, let's just say we continued that all the way around, but you could fine tune it and make it look as good as you want. Now, another thing to learn is that donuts, unlike this one, I mean, this is actually pretty good, but you could see that the edge, like the donut shape, something happens in the middle of it, okay? And you might be able to see it in other reference photos. But basically, usually it's like divoted. It's like it's fat all around it, and then this part on the edge, this one's probably a clear photo, it sort of cuts into it a little bit. And the reason for that, I actually recorded a video that I'll put on the screen here. The reason for that is that when it's cooked, it's put into a fryer. It sits and it just like floats. So half of it is submerged in this fryer, and then it flips, and then they do the other half. So the part that's like resting on the surface of the oil usually is cooked less, because I guess the oil is less hot, I guess. But I guess it would depend on the buoyancy of the donut, so maybe it doesn't happen all the time. But evidently, that seems to be one component of a donut, is that it has that bit that sort of goes in. So it's like it's fat up top, it goes in a little bit, and then it's fat down the bottom again. So let's do that in edit mode with our donut. But we need more geometry. Same problem as we did with the donut icing straight away. We've got the same problem here. So I'm going to apply my subsurf modifier over here, hit apply. Now I've got double the geometry, and I don't need to add another one because I don't really need it right now. And now I'm going to hit O, O again, turn that on. Disable snapping, because I no longer need that, or I don't need it for this step anyway. And then using my proportional fall off, because I do want that, I'm just going to make it like a little bit flat on the inside part here. Okay. Cool. Because I don't really. We need more geometry. That bit, evidently. He recorded a video that I'll put on the screen here. The reason for that is that when it's cooked, it's put into a fryer. It sits and it just like floats. So half of it is submerged in this fryer, and then it flips, and then they do the other half. So the part that's like resting on the surface of the oil usually is cooked less, because I guess the oil is less hot, I guess. But I guess it would depend on the buoyancy of the donut, so maybe it doesn't happen all the time. But evidently, that seems to be one component of a donut, is that it has that bit that sort of goes in. So it's like it's fat up top, it goes in a little bit, and then it's fat down the bottom again. So let's do that in edit mode with our donut. But we need more geometry. Same problem as we did with the donut icing straight away. We've got the same problem here. So I'm going to apply my subsurf modifier over here, hit apply. Now I've got double the geometry, and I don't need to add another one because I don't really need it right now. And now I'm going to hit O, O again, turn that on. Disable snapping because I no longer need that, or I don't need it for this step anyway. And then using my proportional fall off, because I do want that, I'm just going to make it, turn that on, geometry, and I don't need to add another one because I don't really need it right now. And now I'm going to hit O, whoops. O again, turn that on. Disable snapping because I no longer need that, or I don't need it for this step anyway. And then using my proportional fall off, because I do want that, I'm just going to make it like a little bit flat on the inside part here. Okay, cool. All right, now this is now way off. Okay, so why did I do it in this order? Right, why, Andrew? Why didn't we start shaping it the way like that? Because now it would seem like we have to go through here, turn on this, and like snap it for each one of these parts, and that's just annoying. Well, you don't, okay, because there is and I did it in this order because I wanted, because now it would seem like we have to go through here, turn on this, and like snap it for each one of these parts, and that's just annoying. Well, you don't, okay, because there is, and I did it in this order because I want to show you there's two ways to make something snap. The other one is the shrink wrap modifier. So the shrink wrap modifier, if I click this little target eyedropper here, the eyedropper, whenever you see that, it just means click it and then select on your viewport which object you want to target. If you hit that, it will now snap to the mesh. Now, what's happened? Why does it look like, I don't know, pretty cool pattern, but yeah. Why is it doing that? It's because of the order of your modifier. So if something doesn't look right, check the order of your modifiers. It's working top to bottom. So it's giving thickness first, and then later on it's shrink wrapping it to it. So obviously that's not right. Shrink wrapping goes first. Now that we've done that, you can see this is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like after. So shrink wrap modifier will try to find the shortest distance between each of these points and the mesh underneath it. And it just so happens to usually get it right. Just check the inside part, make sure there's no problems there. But yeah, that's how you can do it. So now we've got something that looks a little bit more like the shape of a donut, right? Because the edges are, that the sides of it are not jutting out. They seem to be flat. And that's kind of cool. It's kind of what we want. I might actually make this bottom bit just a little bit fatter. So I'm going to hit Alt-S on this. Whoop, turn off this. Alt-S, just make this a little bit chunkier. Just add a little bit of interest to it. And then, yeah, just go through it and continue making your icing droopy like you want. Now, this was one way to do this droopiness, and it's okay, but it doesn't look as good as it could, right? Because when this drip goes down here, you can see that it becomes more bulbous, right, as the liquid sort of forms that droplet there, and we are missing that. We are going to do that in the next step, the next part. We are going to jump into sculpting. So just basically create the basic sort of form that you want, but we're going to do more detail and learn about another tool of Blender, sculpting, in the next part. So go ahead, click here on the screen, and I will see you in the next part. See why professionals like Oscar Woinski trust Polygon for their models and textures. Sign up for free at polygon.com to see the difference that high quality assets can make to your. Apply what you want before you start sculpting. So we want all of these applied in this order. So you can go to the little drop down and hit apply, or you can use the hotkey Control A and Control A again. Okay, so when I do that, I've applied also that sub div modifier, right? So it's given me double the amount of vertices, which is, again, what I would need, because if I go back to what it looked like before, that's not enough to really play with it. Because what we want to do is we want to create some of these little globules Pretend that's a word. Globules, little droplets that sort of bulge out. So we need more vertices. Configured layout. So instead of having this, it's just like pre-configured to work this way. Use the hotkey Control A and Control A again. Okay, so when I do that, I've applied also that sub div modifier, right? So it's given me double the amount of vertices, which is, again, what I would need, because if I go back to what it looked like before, that's not enough to really play with it. Because what we want to do is we want to create some of these little globules. Pretend that's a word. Globules, little droplets that sort of bulge out. So we need more vertices. So I'm going to hit Control A on that, and now we've got enough. So sculpt mode, let's do it. Go up to the top tab of your window there. So these are workspaces. Yeah, all these ones along here, these are workspaces. And basically it's just like a pre-configured layout. So instead of having this, it's just like pre-configured to work this way. But you can also swap in and out of certain modes wherever you are without changing your mode, just by hitting Control Tab. I suppose I should turn that tool back on. Let's hit that. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So sculpt mode, if you just start drawing, just paint across it, you'll see that you've got some sculpting happening. And there are a number of different tools within sculpting. The draw one is the most basic. It's literally a sort of a push-pull based on where it is that you're looking from. It'll just basically push the surface out towards you. And then the opposite of that, if you hold down Control, that is sort of the reverse of a brush. So you can see that it's now digging into it. So a whole bunch of these you could use. I'd say the most common is it's probably grab, which you can use by just tapping G or hitting that one down there. And that enables you to click and pull out onto, yeah, just anywhere. Now, the brush size of this is really small. So you can change the brush size up here. I don't know why, but my mouse is doing this weird thing where it doesn't register my movement until like I start moving. It's very bizarre. Anyways, but you could do it there, but actually the hotkey, which is just a far easy way of doing it, is F. And then F, you just drag out until you've got the size that you want, basically, and then you just do a single click. And then Shift F will give you the strength. So you can see in the top, actually, as I move, you can see the strength value changing there as well. But I'll just leave that as the default. And you can see, yeah, now dragging makes a lot more sense. So, what is the difference between like using grab here and then using it here? I mean, it's just like ease of use, like which one makes more sense depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So some people would find that working with grab in certain areas would be preferable, and then others might find, as I do sometimes, that you want to see the mesh. You want to actually be able to like control it and take vertices and move them on specific axes. Oh yeah, that thing's still kicking in. I'll turn that off. Yeah, so that might be useful, but in this case, we want to do some sculpting. So okay, so grab. What's another one that's really heavily used is smooth, and this will obviously smooth out detail. Now, you can also temporarily activate smooth anywhere, regardless of what tool you've got, just by holding down Shift. So if you just use Shift, you can see that it's just temporarily activated the smooth tool. So if you want it, because it's such a, I don't know why the default is set to 0.7. That seems way too high to me. But if you're using another tool and you start holding down Shift, you don't have the control to change the strength. The strength is still reflected over here. So if you want to, I would suggest turning that down to like a 0.2, and then when you use it, it's like now a lot more subtle when you use the smooth tool. Okay, now the other one that I'd say it's pretty heavily used, even for sculpting characters and things, is inflate, and that is the one that we really want to use here for these globules. So if I just click in one place and I don't move my mouse, it doesn't build upon it unless you've got airbrush as a setting turned on. So you can see if you hit N, you're on your properties, and then go to tool, this is showing your active tool. It's also here, by the way. So these are your properties, right, for your scene and everything else. But this one at the top there is active tool. So what is the difference between this and this? Nothing. It's completely the same. It was just a habit that I went to properties. But yeah, it's over here now. So if you turn on, let me just find it actually. There it is, airbrush. So if you basically that enables you don't have to like move your mouse. You could just click on it and leave it wherever it is that you want, and then it will just build upon that area basically. So I can click there, I can click here. Here, like such. I don't know. What was that video of the Miss America and such as things and such? I don't know. Poor girl. You don't want to become a meme for something like that. So airbrush is working. It works fine over here, but it's not working so great over there. So I'm going to switch it back to space, which basically means it'll activate when you draw out further enough that it thinks there should be another dot there, basically. But anyways, I'm basically looking at my reference photo again, which I can bring back by dragging this out and then going to image editor, and from the drop down, just click on this. I can see that, yeah, basically on the areas, not just on like these globule bits, but here as well. Like up here, you can see that it's like a thin film of that icing, but down there, that's where it all rolls off to. So really on the outer edge there, I want to do some painting. So I'm just clicking along that edge there with the inflate brush. If you find that it's too much, you can use Shift F to turn it down and get more subtle movements, or turn it up. And obviously, this will work a lot better if you have a stylus. So a stylus has the one big advantage. I mean, not just because it's, you can flick your wrist. That's not really the big advantage of styluses. It's more so because you've got pen pressure. So you can subtly do like and then and taper it and do different pen pressures. It's like even like really basic styluses will have like 2,000 levels of pen pressure that it'll detect as your fingers like pushing on it or whatnot. Whereas your mouse has one. It's a binary on and off thing. So I'm using mouse right now because I know that most of you watching are also using a mouse. So I want to show you that it is possible. But I also want to say, I recommend getting a stylus if you can afford it. And especially if you want to get into characters, or, don't rush out and invest in something before you're absolutely sure that you enjoy Blender and that this is something you want to do. But at some point, you'll probably realize as you get into 3D more that, you know, a stylus is probably a worthwhile investment. So you can pick them up cheap, man, really cheap. Just look on like Facebook Marketplace, just type in Wacom, WACOM. That's sort of like the leading brand. But there's a bunch of like cheaper brands nowadays that you could go to as well. Anyways, another one I'm going to do is just across here because we got this sculpt brush out. Why not just add a little bit of variance? Oh, the strength is too high. I'll turn that down. A little bit of variance to our top, our icing here. Why not? So I'm just doing a few little dabs, a dab here, a dab there, just to give a little bit of a wavy surface. Why not? And then also down here, although it's not really going to be seen that much, I'll just make sure that there's a little bit of variance here, right? It's usually where it's like, it's all sort of mushed together in the center anyway. Would there be like a little bit of the dough sticking out underneath? I don't know. Donut shops are popular, man. Like, I don't know if that's like a revelation to anyone else, but like, I don't know. I try to eat healthy and like avoid sugary things, right? And so I just, for my whole life, I've just been ignoring like donut shops. But then I went there to take a like reference photo or that video that I showed you. And I was like, wow, there's a queue. And it wasn't like a like, you know, artisanal donut shop or anything. This was just like your regular Donut King, just in the shopping center. I was like, wow. So there are people that are just like, got to go do my groceries. Yeah, buy a donut. Not judging. Okay. Well, I mean, look, okay. Everybody judges. But it's one of those things where it's like you think the rest of the world is how you view it, right? But it's not. Everyone's got their own snacks. Some people would say that me eating nuts is a poor idea of a snack. Maybe it is. All right. Looking at my donut here, let's do some more. Yeah, might as well. We got the sculpt brush out. So select your donut. If you can't do that, you have to Control Tab. This is how I'm doing this, or you can go up here. You have to swap to object mode, remember, before you can switch to another object to start sculpting that. So when you've got the other object selected, then Alt Tab and do some sculpting over here as well. So I'll do a little bit of inflation. Not hyperinflate. No. Only the U.S. government can do that. I don't know. I don't know anything about politics or economics. I just see stuff on the news. Hyperinflation. I'm like, ooh, doesn't sound good. All right. Just a few. Maybe I need a little bit more strength. Wow, I don't know. Is this my blender or is this mouse? My mouse that's doing that. I don't know. It's very bizarre. All right. Well, maybe I just need to reformat my computer. It's been a while. Okay. How's it looking? Pretty good. I'll swap back. I'll do a little bit here, a dab here, a dab there. You get the idea, right? I don't need to show you everything. Play around with it. Grab brush, G, inflate brush, I, and smooth brush. You just hold down Shift wherever you want. Don't do it too much. That's kind of a common mistake. People smooth out things when they're sculpting, and you just smooth out all the detail. It's not good. You want to do just a little bit here and there. Okay, and I'll pull that up there. All right, so you can see the differences, right, that sculpting has. It's more of a fluid, organic motion that you can sort of, it's more creative than the edit mode where you're coming in here with the vertices. But there are pros and cons of each. Sculpt mode, you can't do that snap to faces thing, right? Especially when you've got, you know, a surface like this, right? That's got volume now because we've applied the solidify thing. You can't do that snap thing. So because we want it wrapping around our donut, it's good that we did it in this order. Otherwise, we would be out of luck. It's also a little bit harder to do like this part, right? Like it's like this part needs to go out, this part needs to go in. Yeah, it's just, there are certain things that you'll be like, oh, it's just going to be easier if I just swap into edit mode, you know, and I'll do it there. And then I'll swap back to sculpt mode when I want to do something there. You just sort of get better at it. Anyways, I'm going to jump back to layout mode now, which is, I guess, sort of, maybe it's more of like the default view, but layout is the one that you normally stay on. That's where at least that's where I stay rooted. And then because we've got like some of this like little jagged edges coming in, I'm going to add in another subsurf modifier. And if you've got a poor computer and you find that like it's like rendering becomes complex later, or it's hard to move around your viewport, you might not want to. You might want to just like delete that perhaps there, and then I'll swap back to. It's also a little bit harder to do like this part, right? Like it's like this part needs to go out, this part needs. Needs to go in. Yeah, it's just there are certain things that you'll be like, oh, it's just going to be easier if I just swap into edit mode, and I'll do it there, and then I'll swap back to sculpt mode when I want to do something there. You just sort of get better at it. Anyways, I'm going to jump back to layout mode now, which is, I guess, sort of maybe it's more of like the default view, but layout is the one that you normally stay on. That's where at least that's where I stay rooted. And then because we've got like some of this like little jagged edges coming in, I'm going to add in another subsurf modifier. And if you've got a poor computer and you find that like it's like rendering becomes complex later, or it's hard to move around your viewport, you might not want to. You might want to just like delete that perhaps. But on my case, I would just want to make that look nice and smooth. So that's why I've left that in. All right. Well, that is sculpting. That's good. We made some good time. Go ahead and join me in the next video as we get into... To make renders like these, you need high quality assets. NumberPad 0. and that will snap the camera to that location. Alternatively, and this is something that users, now it's time to talk about rendering and lighting and shading and everything else. So as I explained at the start, if you go and you hit a render, it will take a snapshot of what you've got from the point of view of the camera. Now, it has done that. It just so happens our donut is really, really tiny because when we scaled down our donut, we didn't change the light or the camera. So to bring this camera in here, there's a couple of ways you could do it. I mean, you could just, drag it in and try and manually position it. The way I like to do it is I get my view where I like it, like where I want my camera, like this. And then I hit the, let me turn on the screen keys too. I hit the hotkey Control-Alt number pad 0, and that will snap the camera to that location. Alternatively, and this is something that users of other 3D software, I hit the hotkey Control-Alt number pad 0, and that will snap the camera to that location. Alternatively, and this is something that users of other 3D software is most familiar with, in your properties, so I just hit N to bring up properties, under view, you can click camera to view. And then when you move like normally, like orbiting around your scene, the camera will stay locked to have. So I just hit N to bring up properties. Under view, you can click camera to view. And then when you move like normally, like orbiting around your scene, the camera will stay locked to it. If you don't have that checked, if you're looking through the camera and then you just start panning, you can see you've broken it, right? And now the camera is there. So doing it like this means that you can basically put your camera, position it wherever you want it, and it'll always stay locked. Some people leave it always locked. Like I work with a guy who's like learned 3D with 3ds Max, and that's what he's familiar with. He just leaves that checked. To me, it's weird. I hate opening up a scene and seeing this, so I always uncheck it, but it's up to you. Anyways, okay, position my camera there. I hit render. All right, the light is really far away. Let's bring the light in to be somewhere close by. Here's another hotkey that's actually pretty convenient in this case. The lamp's all the way over there. Our donut is there. If you hit Alt-G, that will actually snap any object, any selected object to the center of the 3D viewport, which is where these axes lines intersect, which just so happens to be where our donut is. So I'll just move this over here like that, just so we've got like some basic directional light left to right. And let's look through our camera. All right, and also I might as well, I don't like that intersecting through my, those grid lines intersecting through my donut. It's just annoying me. All right. Let's move this up. Here's the other way you can move the camera. If you don't like checking that, if you just select the camera frame, then you hit G and just move it like any other object. So that's another way I like to do it. All right. Okay, so now hit F12 to do a render. Okay. The lighting is really, really, really bright because, of course, it was set for a different scale, really far away. Just set it to like somewhere around 20 will be fine for this demonstration. F12, there we go. Okay, cool. So we've now taken a snapshot from the point of view of our camera, and it has calculated the lighting information. It's calculated the shading and all that good stuff. Okay. There is a way, though, to see that exact result in your viewport. And you can do that, top right-hand corner, viewport shading, set the method to rendered. Haha. And now look at that. We have the exact. All right, let's move this up. Here's the other way you can move the camera. If you don't like checking that, so that's there is a way you can do that. Top right-hand corner, viewport shading, set the method to rendered. Haha. And now look at that. We have the exact same result as if we were to hit F12, but we have it in real time as we pan around. So this is the rendered view mode. You can also change this at any point just by holding down Z or Z on your keyboard and just dragging out. So solid view, that's the one that we've been using up until this point. There's also wireframe, and this will just show you the mesh, which is handy sometimes. Pretty similar, by the way, to this one, X-ray, but just different. And then you've got material preview, which is It's used for material previews. It's basically, it uses like an HDR light. So instead of the lighting that you've got in your scene, it's just like a quick way to preview materials because it uses an HDR so you can see reflections and everything else to quickly test things. But rendered, there you go. We've got rendered. So how is it that we're able to, like see things in real time and whatnot? Because rendering is normally a very, very intensive process for the CPU and the processor. It has to calculate all this lighting and shading information. And that is where we need to talk about render engines. By the way, the size of this camera is bugging me. I'm just going to change the viewport display of this. It won't make any difference to a render. It's just for the viewport, just something more reasonable. We need to talk about render engines. By the way, the size of this camera is bugging me. I'm just going to change the viewport display of this. It won't make any difference to a render. It's just for the viewport, just something more reasonable. Okay, render engines. Okay, so what we're looking at right now with this is the Eevee rendering engine. Okay, this is a render engine that Blender comes with. So what on earth is a render engine? So 3D software, technically it's just for creating meshes and animations and everything else. Rendering is often used, you use a third-party tool or you pay a company. So basically there are a whole bunch of render engines out there. You've got V-Ray, Arnold, Redshift, Corona, Octane. Those are sort of the big five. And then also Cycles and Eevee. Cycles and Eevee are what Blender comes with. They're built-in rendering engines, and you can swap between them right here. You've got Eevee and you've got Cycles. Workbench, just ignore that. That is a, it basically takes a, like, you hit render and it's the exact same result as if you're in solid view mode, like the viewport kind of thing. It's used for basically like taking screenshots, essentially, for like breakdowns and things. Okay, so Eevee. Eevee is a real-time rendering engine. If you've played with Unreal Engine, Unity, if you've played with sort of any 3D tool that has sort of shading information in it in real time, you're able to see things in real time, that is a real-time rendering engine. Cycles, if we switch to Cycles, you will notice something. It takes longer and you get this grain that appears over everything, okay? And also, you will probably notice it is slower. Okay, it is no longer real time. You can see that it's sort of lagging here. Cycles is some people call it an offline rendering engine. What cycle, and also you will probably notice it is slower. Okay, it is no longer real time. You can see, and you get this grain that appears over everything. Okay, and also you will probably notice it is slower. Okay, it is no longer real time. You can cycles. If we switch to cycles, Unreal Engine, Unity, if you've played with sort of any 3D tool that has sort of shading information in it in real time, you're able to see things in real time. That is a real-time rendering engine. Cycles, if we switch to cycles, you will notice something. It takes longer and you get this grain that appears over everything, okay? And also, you will probably notice it is slower, okay? It is no longer real time. You can see that it's sort of lagging here. Cycles is some people call it an offline rendering engine. It's also a path tracer, that's the more technical term, or ray tracer. What Cycles is doing that Eevee is not is it is calculating light bounces. Okay, so you can see in here, and you'll see this difference. If I swap from Cycles, so this is Cycles. Now see how light it looks inside here? If I swap to Eevee, watch what happens. It's just dark, all right? There's no light that's entering into that area there, okay? So the advantages that you get with a real-time engine like Eevee is that it is real-time. When I hit render here, I get a result in less than a second. In fact, it should be real-time, really, because it's real-time. If I wanted to do it in cycles and I was to hit render, I would see it has to whir through it. It's also counting samples here, and it's giving me a result in 4 seconds. All right, so that is a huge difference. And that's 4 seconds is the fastest ever. It escalates from there, okay? But you get better results with cycles. So it really depends on what it is you're using it for. Some people swear by Eevee, they just love it, especially if you're doing like non-photorealistic work, like motion graphics, advertising sometimes. What else? Cartoony, stylized things, you can kind of get away with it. I just love cycles because everything sort of works. The thing about Eevee is that you often have to change things to tweak it to make it look realistic, whereas cycles is realistic from the start. Okay, but let's, one other thing, because if you're using cycles, you might find it is really incredibly slow. And that might be because you're not using your GPU. So there are two ways to render. One is with your CPU, and that would be set to none if you're using your CPU. The other way is to use your GPU, which would be clicking one of these things. So CUDA and OptiX are what you'll see if you have a NVIDIA graphics card that is compatible. I have two Titan RTXs, yay me. I want to get two 3090s. I'm no longer top dog. I want to upgrade, but I'm waiting for the prices to go down. You'll only see these options if you've got a NVIDIA card. I have never seen HIT before. Oh, okay. All right. It's the AMD one. Okay. So they're jumping in. That's good. Okay. So there are some options out there. So if you have a compatible card and you see those options, definitely use it because more than likely it'll be miles faster than CPU rendering. For context, let me show you. CPU on my CPU rendering, you can see it's going to take a while. I'm already past 4 seconds and I'm not even a 10th into it. Not even 100th. Okay, it's getting faster. All right, it's speeding up because you can see it's figured out. Okay, so 16 seconds. So it's 4 times as long on my CPU. Now, obviously, that will change wildly depending on your hardware. Yeah, okay, and what's the difference between CUDA and OptiX, by the way? If you've got both, use OptiX. It's the newer one. It's only for newer cards. It's more compatible, and it will be faster. CUDA is older compatible, so you might not see it if you've got an older card. But use OptiX if you've got it. Okay, but let's swap it back to Eevee because I know that some people will want to use this tutorial just for Eevee because not everybody has a graphics card or anything that can really perform it, and you might just have to use Eevee. So I'm going to show you how we can get this working with Eevee. First of all, let's add in a mesh so that we can see how it's going to look with shadows. Okay, this is where Eevee falls apart. It's shadows. Or it doesn't really fall apart. It's where you need to start tweaking things. Cycles will just work. Okay? It's got bounce lighting. It's got the correct, like, look, that darkness under there, right? It's got, Eevee starts to fall apart. Now, it just means you have to tweak settings with Eevee, okay? One of the big ones is lamp settings and shadow settings. Okay, so in Eevee, underneath shadows, one thing I want to do for a scene of this size is I want to change my cube size. Cascade is just for sun lighting. Cube size is for other sources of lighting. And this is sort of the resolution of your shadow. Okay, so you can see the difference that I just made there from 512 to, let's go up to 4096. It's going to be slightly slower to render, but you can see it's something of this closeness. It really does need that detail. Okay, so I've got that. Now, the other thing that I need to do is fix what on earth is happening with this shadow. How is it that shadow is able to go through there? Okay, again, now, slightly slower to render, but you can see it's something of this closeness. It really does need that detail. Okay, so I've got that. Now, the other thing that I need to do is fix what on earth is happening with this shadow. How is it that shadow is able to go through there? Okay, again, now, this is one of the restraints, the problems with real-time engines is that it is not actually calculating like light. It's all like fakery. It's an illusion that it's able to calculate shadow. And you often need to tell the software how to treat this shadow better. And one of the big ones of a scene of this size with this lamp here, select your lamp, and then under here you've got bias settings. Bias is for reducing self-shadowing, and it's basically you would change the scale of this depending on what size of scene you're building. In our case, we want to turn this all the way basically to its lowest amount because we're dealing with like millimeters. Okay, so I'm just turning that all the way down to 0. You've also got contact shadows, which can occasionally be helpful, but in our case, this case isn't really useful because that's another fakery, and you get all sorts of glitchiness. And I don't want to talk about contact shadows. Well, maybe when we add the sprinkles, you might want to use contact shadows, but you want to use the absolute lowest amount you could possibly get away with. Some people go, it's not designed for true shadowing like this. Anyway. Okay, so you can see I had to make a whole range of tweaks there, but I got the result. Now, we haven't got any materials yet, so that is something else to consider, is that, you might see some differences now, and you think like, oh, there's not really that much of a difference between cycles and EV. Like, this is just the start. So that is something else to consider, is that, you might see some differences now, and you think like, oh, there's not really that much of a difference between cycles and EV. Like, this is just the start. Once you get further and further into it, there's you'll see bigger and bigger differences. Now okay, maybe I'll try and keep it. I won't talk about samples yet. Okay, so difference between cycles and EV, you get it, right? Bounce lighting. It's bouncing the light off the table on the cycles one, and it's casting it where it needs to. It goes in the hole. So one of the restraints, the problems with real-time engines is that it is not actually calculating like light. It's all like fakery. It's an illusion that it's able to calculate shadow. And you often need to tell the software how to treat the shadow better. And one of the big ones of a scene of this size with this lamp here, select your lamp. And then under here, you've got bias settings. Bias is for reducing self. Okay, so I'm just turning that all the way down, shadowing like this. Anyway, okay, so you can see I had to make a whole range of tweaks there, but I got the result. Now, we haven't got any materials yet, so that is something else to consider, is that, you know, you might see some differences now, and you think like, oh, there's not really that much of a difference between Cycles and EV. Like, this is just the start. Once you get further and further into it, there's you'll see bigger and bigger differences. Now, okay, maybe I'll try and keep it. I won't talk about samples yet. Okay, so difference between Cycles and EV, you get it, right? Bounce lighting. It's bouncing the light off the table on the Cycles one, and it's casting it where it needs to. It goes in the hole. Light is bouncing around. EV, none of that. So what do you want? You might prefer the EV one. You might be totally fine with it. Casting it where it needs to. It goes in the hole. Light is bouncing around. EV, no. Keep it. I won't talk about samples yet. Okay, the start. Once you get further and further into it, there's you'll see bigger and bigger differences. Now okay, maybe I'll try and keep it. I won't talk about samples yet. Okay, so difference between Cycles and EV, you get it, right? Bounce lighting. It's bouncing the light off the table on the Cycles one, and it's casting it where it needs to. It goes in the hole. Light is bouncing around. EV, none of that. So what do you want? You might prefer the EV one. You might be totally fine with it. Something you have to do with the EV, for example, is ambient occlusion, which will calculate basically in crevices and things. It will do what Cycles does by default without needing to use that, right? That darkening of the effect there. So again, EV, you got to turn on things to try to make it look realistic, whereas Cycles is realistic by default. All right, so let's do some materials now. Okay, let's get into it. With my icing here selected, I'm going to click the material icon here, and I'll move this up so my head's not blocking everything, and I will add a new material. Okay, now we'll get more into materials later on, but you can see there's a lot of settings here, a lot. Now, this is the principled shader. It's actually based off of Disney's principled BSDF paper they put out. It's pretty high tech. It actually makes things very simple to create a realistic material. You used to have to, for any material, like add nodes, like diffuse, and then I want some reflection. I have to add some reflection. I have to do this, and then tweak it with a Fresnel, and it was really complex, really complex. This is one of the key things that's enabled a lot of beginners and people to start making things faster, because it's now built into one shader and it automatically adjusts to the correct measurements, like roughness and reflection and everything, depending on what other values are. So it's really good. The one that you're probably looking for just color is base color. So I'll just set that to a nice pink color. All right. Then the other big one you change a lot is roughness down here. And this is the glossiness. It's often, roughness and glossy values. Different renderers call them different things. Glossy, is what other renderers call it. Roughness, they're inverts of each other. Basically, glossy is the invert of roughness, but it's the same sort of thing. So I want this is like how wet, like how freshly iced do you want your donut to look? I find it real icing, it's probably more around about a 0.25 or something like that. But I like it to look a little wet. It looks, in my opinion, more delicious when it's got some wetness to it. We'll get more into it as we do other things later on, but just as a basics. Then for my donut, I'll add another material. Let's just add a basic color to it. And again, we'll do more with this later on. And then why not just make it interesting? We're not even going to use this plane in the final render. This is just so that we've got something nice to look at right now. And let's hit a render. Okay, cool. Now, oh, by the way, I didn't even mention this, but there's slots. So when you're rendering, if you just want to like quickly preview two different things, you could change slots like up to 8. So if you want to open up a new slot, you just switch to that slot first, and then you hit render, and then it'll save it into that slot. In my case, I'm going to put it in slot 2 again to override my cycles one, and I'll switch back to cycles. Okay, now the plot thickens. We have true reflections with our cycles rendering engine. Okay, it's ray tracing. Okay, so it's calculating the reflection of the end of our plane here, and you can see we've got some shine there. Now you can do that with Eevee, thank goodness, by turning it on. So again, some things you have to turn on: screen space reflections, and now you can see I've got a little bit of reflections coming off it. Okay, something else you might want to turn on is bloom. That is sort of the, what would you call it? Like glare, maybe? Glare. I'm not really an Eevee guy, to be honest. I don't use it that often, but it's something you could turn on to add a little bit of glare to it or something like that. But there you go. So we got that, and then we got the cycles one, and it's, you start to understand it. Okay. Now let's add in something of this scale and of this material quality, which is icing, which if you've ever looked at my ear, for example, or anyone's ear in direct sunlight, you can often see through it. Can I get it so that you can see through it? Nah. Okay. But you get like, you see like the blood vessels and like your ears glow red in sunlight, right? That is scattering. It's light that is scattering through a surface. You see it, like that's the example everyone gives, an ear, but also you see it in things like a glass of milk. You see light start to like enter into it and sort of diffuse through the milk. Well, something of this scale and this type of material does the same thing. And it kind of feels hard, like the donut feels hard, like it's almost like it's made of concrete or something. It's because it doesn't have any of that scattering. So that is this value, subsurface scattering. So if I increase this to let's try 0.1. This radius here, you can see that it's changed it. It looks terrible. This radius here is actually in meters. Like how far does it scatter in meters? Shouldn't scatter that far. And it's also why there are 3 of them. That's the red channel, green channel, blue channel, which is probably, I don't know why it split it like that. Probably because of mass and the fact that, different rays will spread at different wavelengths, like distances. I don't know. But either way, I just change all of them at once, which you can do by dragging down over the values. And then I just adjust it to, I'll just enter it in 0.002, which is really, what is that? Is that millimeters? Hang on. Let's try this. 2 mil. Oh, you can't enter it in here, even though it is actually like in millimeters. But let's go 0.02. I think that is millimeters. No, that's 2 centimeters. 0.02. Okay, there we go. That's 2 millimeters. I try not to diverge from the script, Andrew. I've rehearsed this before. All right. Now you can't see much here. And part of that is also because the subsurface color is the one that it is looking for. So what color should it be when it scatters through something? I usually make this like a more saturated version of the base color. I don't know if that's technically accurate, but it's sort of what I do. And then this subsurface value here would basically control like how much scattering do you want to have happen. So this is what it looks like before. I'm going to do another one right here. And let's just see now that we compare it, okay? So not much difference. And look, it's pretty hard to tell on something of this type of material. You will notice it a lot better when we've got the sprinkles on top, because we'll be able to see the shadows and everything like that. You might be able to see a little bit there. I don't know. Anyways, then I'll do another one with cycles, because why not? And I'm going to be sticking to cycles for the rest of the tutorial until maybe the end. I'll try and sort of make it more compatible towards the end. But I generally try to stick to cycles because it does make it simple. And if you've got a card that can perform it well, it's pretty nice. It does, you will notice a difference, right, in overall quality with cycles. But again, I know it's not for everyone. So there are the two options for you. So, by the way, here's something else that you can do. So the material view that I mentioned, this preview mode, it is using an HDR, which is cool because you can see like the reflections on it and you can see the shape and you can understand how this would be helpful for building a material. You can tweak it and see everything in real time. It's great. If you change it to scene lights, it will take advantage of the lights that you have in your scene. And then if you check this button, Scene World, it is now taking advantage of everything, the whole world as well. So there is actually no difference between if you've got those two things checked and actually just using Eevee. So if I switch that to Eevee, you can see that I can swap between these. There is no difference. So what that means is I can keep my rendering engine to cycles. And then if I just want to preview everything in Eevee, I can keep it there. And then I can swap to cycles when I need it over here. Haha. Okay. I mentioned I was going to talk about samples. So that's what this grain is, okay? So the way path tracers work is that, oh God, how technical do you want to get? It's a Monte Carlo Russian roulette system where it's, it gets really, really complex. But basically, it samples, it starts grainy and then it gradually refines the image to try to arrive at a repeatable, predictable result. Basically. So you can see it's starting to get grainy and then it eventually resolves and it says rendering done. So it says rendering done when it has reached its max samples right here. And you can see there are two settings here. You've got viewport and you've got render. So when I hit render, that's why it was taking a little bit longer because the max samples is 4 times as high. Now for something of this size, you don't need that many samples. In fact, yes, there is grain here, but there is a secret weapon that we have not engaged yet, and that is the denoiser. So the denoiser it's using AI to try to smooth out the image without having to arrive at that final image, okay? So I can set my max sample to something low, like 100. And then when I move, you can see that previously it had to get to like 4,000 to try to like get rid of the noise. Now at just 100 samples, it's cleared it all up. It is miraculous. This is one of the biggest, what NVIDIA did, and I'm sure it wasn't just NVIDIA, a whole bunch of companies create different denoisers. But introducing this to all the softwares for people that have NVIDIA cards, that's why they did it for free, was one of the biggest leaps forward for rendering, honestly. Like the fact that you can now just render with cycles at a low sample count means that it's crazy. You can use it for so much more now. This one's going on a little bit. But anyways, so that's viewport. Now, here's the thing. With the viewport, you'll notice that watch how slow the samples climb up when you've got denoising turned on versus when I turn it off. Okay, so the denoiser, by the way, you can change the denoiser to be CPU based and it'll be really slow. That's the Intel Open denoiser one. Automatic will use basically optics if you have a compatible card, or you can just set to optics. But anyways, it will slow it down because it's trying to do a denoise as well as sampling, and it's slowing it down. It is nice, but yeah, it will slow it down. So what I like to do is set the starting sample to something high, like 50. And then that way, at least it gets through all, like, because at the lowest value of like 1, like it's too noisy to understand anyway, like to try to start it then. So I set it at 50, and then that way I can move around and it won't slow down the grain clearing up, basically. And that's viewport. So I'm going to do the exact same thing over here. Denoiser. I'll set it to optics. Thank you very much. That's interesting. I didn't actually know that was defaulting as the Intel one. Who knows? It doesn't really matter because the Intel one is slower, but it's only doing it once when you're hitting render. So it's probably not that big of a difference whether you use that or that. But anyways, then I'm going to set my rendering engine, my max samples of my engine to 100 as well. And let's see how fast it does this. Okay, here we go. Compared to the 4,000 samples before, it's now doing it in 3 seconds. Okay, And how long was the? Yeah, so obviously it is still much slower than the EV1 because the EV1 is real time, but like 3 seconds, that's pretty dang fast. That's not bad. So it's not big of a difference. I probably should have also mentioned these sample settings. It is a cycles only thing. Yes, there are samples in Eevee. It does say sample counts, but it's a different sort of sample. It's not the same. Like it's basically samples are a concern with cycles, really, mostly. So that's really, you see a lot of people caring about samples because the higher the samples you go, that's like it's going to go longer and longer and longer to clear the grain, basically, right? If I turn off the denoise thing, right? If I set this to 0, it's just going to keep rendering forever and ever. Oh, no. Oh, because of noise threshold, it's now actually arriving at a result. But you could just leave it going forever and ever and ever. So, yeah, some people, like especially for like production scenes, you'll spend a long time like coming in here and just finding like the exact, amount of samples that you can get away with. Because maybe I didn't mention, but yeah, the higher should look fairly well. I'll be swapping to it every now and then, so I might be adjusting some of the settings later. See why professionals like Oscar. Okay, I spoke out of turn. I know I said in the last part we were going to do geometry nodes. Got ahead of myself. Sorry to excite you. Texturing and shading comes first because it is much more essential. In this case, for example, our donut, we've just got solid colors, and that's okay for our icing, but our donut base here is a solid, almost canary yellow. That's definitely the wrong shade of donut. Real donuts, bringing up some reference photos. By the way, this extra software here, I haven't mentioned it, PureRef. It's what all 3D artists use to manage reference. You can just like paste in images from the internet and then just create like a canvas and then like rearrange things, and it's really, really fantastic. But anyways, I've just got 2 photos here. Real donuts, they're not just one solid color, right? As we spoke about in the last part, no, not last part, but the modeling part, right? Where we created that part that like indents it. Because of the way donuts are cooked, you have some parts that are going to receive less hot fat that it's sitting in when it's cooking. So this middle part, and it's most visible here, can often be lighter than the rest. Okay, that's one aspect of it. But then also, the rest of the donut isn't one solid color either. It's also got, light patches, brown patches, little speckledy bits and things all over it. And that can add interest. And you might not think you would see it. If you were to do a render up here, you really wouldn't. But we're going to have our donut spinning around on a turntable. So we do need to see it because we're going to see the backside of it. So it's just a great opportunity to just learn about textures and shaders and things a little bit better. So we don't need our icing, so I'm going to hide that just by hitting H, or I think I mentioned this before, but you can also do it up here in the outliner, just clicking the little eye there. We'll just hide it. Hotkey to bring anything back that has the material, the little eye disabled, it's Alt-H. So hide with H or Alt-H to bring it back. Anyways. Okay. Anything back that has the material, the little eye disabled, it's Alt-H. So hide with H or Alt-H to bring it back. Anyways, okay. So this is our donut here. Okay. Now we spoke a little bit about the materials over here. I mean, really all we changed was just the base color, and we did some subsurface scattering for the icing, and we also used the roughness down here. I would say, by the way, that all these values here, they're like confusing, and a lot of artists can like get really into the weeds with it. Like if you just stick to the base color, the roughness value, and then the normal map, which we'll get to in a bit for bump mapping, that's really like 90% of the materials you make will use just those 3 things: base color, roughness, and normal mapping. But anyways, okay. Now this material view here that we've got here, you can see if you wanted to add in image textures and like combine things and whatever, this thing would get very bloated and very like annoying and frustrating to use. And actually the old version of Blender, like 2.49, it's like 10 years ago, you had to do everything in this sort of this view here. Thankfully, we don't have to do that anymore. There is a node editor, which you can access by hitting the shader tab at the top of your window there. That'll take you to the shader workspace, which will load up all these extra windows and things. I think mine is set to solid view shading by default, but yours was probably this one. But yeah, it's loaded up a bunch of extra windows here. I actually don't need the ones on the left-hand side. I never need them. So I'm actually going to click and drag across to merge them. So top left-hand corner of any like sub window, and then you click and drag across, and then you can merge, or you can just right click on the area and say join areas and then just merge it across. So all I'm looking for is my model at the top here, and then at the bottom here, this is our node editor. So you can see that this node here, this long list of settings, let's call it, this one, but yeah, it's loaded up a bunch of extra windows here. I actually don't need the ones on the left-hand side. I never need them. So I'm actually going to click and drag across to merge them. So top left-hand corner of any like sub window, and then your settings, let's call it. This resembles what is over here, because in fact it is a one-to-one copy. So this material panel here is really just a way to, like, if you need simple changes, like, you're just adding in an object, and then, I just want that object to be, red or something. I can do it over here very quickly. But if I want to do texturing and combine things and do like interesting things with the material, that's when you want to switch to the shader. The node editor, which is where you can do, you can add extra nodes and extra things, and it gets really interesting, and you can do it all here. So the way that the node editor works, if you've never worked with nodes, is it works from left to right, okay? And it's very simple at the moment, because this thing, by the way, these boxes, these are called, nodes, okay? And they work left to right. So it's taking a single shader, this Principled BSDF, which, as I said, is based off of Disney's shader. It's fantastic. It's got everything you need most of the time. And then it's just outputting it into this, it's sending that data into the material output as the surface value, and that is what is being rendered. So if I was to add in another node and plug it in here, it would change how it looks. So as an example, if I went to add, and then I added in texture, let's just pick a texture. Let's go Voronoi texture. I've got another node here with some things, distance, color, position, and all things here. If I was to take this, plug this into my base color, how it looks. So as an example, if I went to add, and then I added in texture, let's just pick a texture. Let's go Voronoi texture. I've got another node here with some things, distance, color, position, and all things here. If I was to take this, plug this into my base color, you can see that now this is reflecting. So it's lost the setting that was there before, that canary yellow. It's lost that, and it's replaced it with the input of my Voronoi texture. You should see the difference between distance and color. Texturing, it's a whole thing in and of itself. There's courses on procedural texturing. It's very interesting, and you can do a lot with it. The great thing about a workflow like this, like using a node to create textures, is that you can come back and change it later on. Like if I was to paint in the this browning, white, yellowing effect or whatever, this little speckledy view there, that is one way that you could texture a donut. You could do it that way. The problem is if I then later on realize like, the size of those speckledy bits, they're too big or they're too brown or something like that. If I'd painted that in, I couldn't change it easily later on. But I could if I had done it with shaders over here, with procedural, non-destructive workflows like this. I could come back and change it at any time. So anyways, you can see that going left into this to right and then spitting it out into the material output. That is how we are creating a shader. Okay, so let's delete that and let's now create the actual texture. Okay, so I'm going to add or Shift A, same hotkey as the 3D viewport, by the way. I'm going to add in the texture that you use like 10 times more than any of these others, to be honest, besides maybe image texture, is noise texture right here. So this noise texture, you can see that you've got two outputs, you've got color and you've got factor, and they are very similar. The factor value is basically just the grayscale version of the color. So the color is giving us a sort of a rainbow splatter across everything. And if I change the scale here, I can change the size of that splattering effect. If I take the factor, put that into the base color, it's just the black and white version of that. Okay, so that's all very well and cool, but how do I create the colors of my original donut light, like the colors that I had here originally? By the way, if you want to cut a node string, which you've got there, you could just click and like remove it like that. Or if you just want to cut and slice through the middle, it's Control right mouse drag, and that'll bring out the knife, and then it will just sever any connection basically. So if I want to change the colors of that, I could do this by adding in another node between these two. And the node that I'm looking for is add, or Shift A, add, converter color ramp. Color ramp is a really handy node you'll use. And the node that I'm looking for is add, or Shift A, add, converter color ramp. Color ramp is a really handy node. You'll use it a lot. And if I drop that in between here, this is now taking the black and white values and is converting it into this range, essentially. And you can see that if I just change these sliders, it's basically acting like a contrast of that noise texture. But I could change the colors here to be, anything I wanted. I could make a really weird, horrible looking donut very quickly. But if I change these to something a little more similar to the original donut color, something like that maybe, and then maybe make this like a little bit darker, a little bit more saturated. Let's bring that across or something like that. That looks a little closer to something that was right here. Something else that'll really help you, and I want to use it straight away, is actually it's the Node Wrangler add-on. Because what I want to do is I want to preview my noise texture here to show you something, but you can't really see it very well. And basically, go to your edit preferences, and then go to add-ons, and then just type in Node, and you should see one here called Node Wrangler. So just enable that, and then this will enable you to, if you hold down Control, Shift, and left click on any node, you are then previewing just that node. So just seeing the raw output of that. If you hold down Control, Shift, and left click on any node, you are then previewing just that node. So just seeing the raw output of that and bypassing all this other stuff. I could also, and you should see one here called Edit Preferences, and then go to Add-ons, and then just type in Node, my noise texture here, to show you something, but you can't really see it very well. And basically, go to your Edit Preferences, and then go to Add-ons, and then just type in Node, and you should see one here called Node Wrangler. So just enable that, and then Node Wrangler. So just enable that, and then this will enable you to, if you hold down Control, Shift, and left click on any node, you are then previewing just that node. So just seeing the raw output of that and bypassing all this other stuff. I could also Control Shift on the color ramp and I could see just that one here called Node Wrangler. So just enable that, and then this will enable you to, if you hold down Control, Shift, and left click on any node, you are then previewing just that node. So just seeing the raw output of that and bypassing all this other stuff. I could also Control Shift on the color ramp and I could see just that. And then if I want to see everything, I just Control Shift click on the final shader there. The Node Wrangler is like the one add-on that all Blender users use all the time because it's so handy. You can do a bunch of stuff with it, but yeah, this is one really convenient feature. Anyways, what I wanted to show you with this noise texture here is that it's actually, there's a bit of noise, sorry, there's a bit of stretching. The size of these splotches here are different to how they look on the top. On the top, they look fine, but on the sides here, they look stretched. And that is a little bit technical, but the way that any texturing works in 3D software is it has to take a 2D texture, think of like a Photoshop file, it's an image, and then it has to somehow map that onto a 3D model. In fact, this is actually very obvious when you add an image texture. So if I just add in an image texture, just to demonstrate this, yeah, let's use, why not? Let's use a thumbnail from the previous parts of this tutorial series. If I just paste this on here, bam, Nightmare Fuel. Let's turn off, let's go for it, there you go. You can see that it's stretched around the donut. It's tried to add it, yeah, it's mapped parts of that 2D texture onto this 3D model. It has to do it somehow. And it just so happens that the one that it does for procedural textures, which is what this is, this noise texture, it's just wrong. I think it uses UV or generated or something. Instead, we want to change it to something else. So we can do that by adding another image, another node over here to the left. So Shift A, and then the one that you are looking for is Input Texture Coordinate. Texture Coordinate. So the default one is generated. So if you don't have anything connected into your vector input, which is, by the way, the vector input, vectors, how do you explain vectors? You don't. You just don't. In a beginner tutorial series, you don't need to know it. But really, the colors of these inputs, yellow goes to yellow, green goes to green, gray goes to gray. I mean, it doesn't actually, gray and yellow can be interchangeable. It doesn't really matter if gray goes into a yellow, but generally you want to use the same color going to the same color. So this blue one, you must make sure that at least you've always got a blue input going into it, but it should be a texture coordinate is the one you're looking for. So generated is the one that it will use by default if nothing is added into it. What we want to change it to is object. When you do that, you might think like, oh, it's broken, nothing's happened. It is there, it's just that the scale of this has changed. So I need to increase this to be much higher before I can see that back. And now you can see I don't have that stretching occurring across the donut. Basically, object, it will basically treat the 3D view rather, instead of like wrapping it around, it'll sort of like try to understand it like in a 3D depth, the depth of it, and like if this part of the mesh is like hitting this part of the cloud, it'll map it to there. And anyway, that's sort of the way I imagine it. It's just, yeah, it does the correct mapping essentially for our donut. So we'll change the scale of this. Okay, this is the joy of procedural workflows like this. You can change the size and shape and things of anything you want. You can also change the detail, which you can't really see much going on here, but if you go like detail 0, it's just like soft big shapes, but then you can increase it, and it's kind of like it's adding more and more smaller shape splotches in between it almost. But default is 2. Let's just leave it at that. All right. The other thing I want to do in this case is I want to create, and this is the joy of nodes, is that you can take the output of this and not just use it for the color input, which we've got here, but actually make it drive another part of the shader. And one part of the shader we want to make it drive is the bump map, okay? Because looking at our reference here, you can see it especially on the silhouette, but you can see it here, like the surface. If you were to run your fingernail across that donut, you would see it would raise. There's little bumps and micro grooves and everything happening across there. So we want to make this splotchy effect not just affect the color, but also affect the bump. And we can do that by adding another node, because what we need to do is make it drive this normal input. And there is no way you could ever guess that normal is what would drive the bump information of a shader. And while it would be great to make it like user friendly and say just call this bump, it's not just used for bump. It's used for a whole bunch of things. It's basic. Normal is the directions of the face on the model, essentially. So if you're doing something to the normals of a shader, you are changing the appearance of the way those faces look. It's all very technical. It's kind of mathematical. You don't really need to know it, other than to say that this is a blue input, input. So you couldn't take, and you could try, if you put the factor output of that noise texture into there, that would be wrong. Okay? It doesn't know what to do. It's now like it's converted our faces from smooth to just hard. It's completely wrecked it. I would actually love it if it just came up as red. Like, don't do that. This thing should just be red. We need to convert this first into information that the normal thing can read. So to do that, we want to hit Shift A and then go Vector, and the node I'm looking for is Bump. Okay, if I dropped this in here, if I drop it over a highlighted connector, it will now automatically drop it in there in the middle and connect it. It's done it terribly though. It's tried to guess, but it's done a bad job. I don't want to drive the normal input. I want to put it into the height input. Height. Okay, now it is appearing the way it should. It's just way too strong. Now you might think that what you need to change is the strength. It's actually not correct. The strength should always be 1. It's kind of like on or off, like bump. The one that you're looking for is distance, which is how in the 3D space, like how big do you want these bumps to appear? So it doesn't have a nice slider or anything, but it's the one you need. And I believe, I could be totally wrong on this, but I have heard, I'm pretty sure it's correct, but this distance value is in Blender units, which is by default metric. So this is treating this bump as if it is 1 meter. Like you want the bumps to be 1 meter. Which is ridiculous. So it's about 100 times what it should be. So I'm going to change this to 0.002. 0.002. And now that is much better. Now you can't really see. Can you see it? You can see it okay. You would see it a lot better actually if you turned up the detail. Now this is the joy of bump mapping, of normal mapping really, because that's what this is. This is fakery. All this detail here is detail that you get for free. You can see it's not changing the silhouette of our donut, okay, which is important. This is just, it's a fakery illusion to pretend as if this detail exists when it doesn't. So it's only appearing on the shader, so on the faces of the light and everything like that. It's not actually displacing it. If you wanted to do that, you would have to pay for it with so much higher like mesh density and everything. We did it actually for the previous tutorial. We'll not be using it for this because it was overkill. I went way too far on that. We're just going to keep it simple and make it look nicer as well. So I often joke like the person who discovered normal mapping, or this technique for bump mapping, must have fallen out of their chair. Like in 1990s or 80s or whatever, they must have been like, this is the key that will finally enable us to create the detail needed in film and everything without having to pay for it on our ridiculously slow computers, because it's really insane what it's doing for free. It's all video games use normal maps because it's fake detail and you don't have to pay for it with render times. So it is phenomenal. Anyways, so I don't want to use a detail of 3 because look, this is where it comes into like how detailed, how realistic do you want your donut to look? Because if you go really detailed, you kind of have to do it for everything or else this one part will look odd. I see it a lot because I got 2 kids now, 1 2, 1 4. One that is 2 years old, one that is 4. That was a weird sentence. And they just watch terrible kids shows because there's just so much terrible kids content out there. It's just like all kids shows, they just don't care about like detail consistency. They'll have like a high res grass model and then just like this simplified house. And it's like, why? Just, like, can you not tell that like super detailed Megascans grass model doesn't go with that like Duplo house? I don't know. It's just one of my pet peeves. But what I'm saying is like if you go really detailed on this, you will have to do it for your icing, your everything. So we actually want to go simplified. Keep it sort of a stylized, sort of look. I reckon around like something around about 3. That might look good. And then, change the size of your scale or whatnot if you want to change that. But something like that. Like it's still clearly like not very, like the color hasn't changed much. And we're going to, in the next part, actually do some texture painting. But you can see that it's got more visual interest there than was before. I might actually turn that down to like an even subtler amount, maybe somewhere in the middle. You can change it at any point in the process. That is the joy of 3D rendering. Okay, cool. So in the next part, we are going to be doing the painting aspect, where we're going to create that white part that goes around the middle there. And then we're going to be combining it with the So our existing node setup is a purely procedural workflow. This is all using computer mathematics and everything to create the result, which is all great, and it enables us to adjust things later on. It's great. But for the next thing that we want to add is this white bit around our donut, where it's been sitting in the fat, but it's like getting less hot fat on the surface maybe, so it's cooking it less. So it's a white part of it. And there's a number of ways, there's always 100 ways to skin a cat in Blender. You could do it many different ways. You can make a gradient using computer mathematics and everything to create the result, which is all great, and it enables us to adjust things later on. It's great. But for the next thing that we want to do it all procedurally as well. But I find the fastest way, and actually probably the most, for something like this, like it's kind of like creative and you want to add some variation thing in there, you want to use texture painting. So Blender has that feature, texture paint, the little workspace at the top there. Click that, and this will take you to the, Blender has that feature, texture paint, the little workspace at the top there. Click that, and this will take you to the texture paint window. Now, if you were to switch here, you can see that our donuts become purple, and that's because it needs an image texture to paint into, and one does not exist yet. You could create one over here, but really what you need to do first, and because we've already got a node set up already created over here, the best way to do it to make sure that you do it correctly and you haven't lost something is to add an image texture and then paint into that. Basically add an image texture first and then switch to texture paint. So right up here, I'm going to hit Shift A, then go Input. Is it Input? Sorry. Texture. Image texture. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. Texture, image texture. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. Image texture is the one you're looking for. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug that into the base color. So I'm going to override this. In fact, I don't need the color ramp anymore. I'm just going to keep the noise texture that's going into the bump at the moment. So now that I've got this image texture, there's no image texture added. I'm actually surprised it's black now. It used to be purple. Anytime Blender can't find an image texture, it would come up as purple. But evidently it's black for some reason. Anyways, you could, if you were to hit these two buttons here, Open will open a texture from your hard drive, as we demonstrated in the last part. You could do that. But if you want to paint into something or paint something from scratch, you want to hit New. And by the way, this one on the left-hand side here, this will show you any textures that's currently loaded into Blender. I could bring that up as well. So this is the previous reference photo that I loaded into Blender. So it's like temporarily storing it in the background so that I could recall it later on if I wanted. What I want to click on is New, because I want to create a new image texture. So I'm going to hit New, and then when you hit New, you get this like temporary little window pop-up thing. This is where we can change some values of things. The most important thing is the height and width. So this is the resolution of the image texture we're going to paint into. So obviously, the higher res you go, then the more detail you could paint in, right? So this is, I mean, you really shouldn't care about this as you're a beginner, because you won't know, like, depending on what model you're making, like how high res you need to go. But generally, like, you need to think, like, how close is the camera going to be to my object, and how, like, am I rendering in 4K? Is the camera going really close? Yes, you're going to need to maybe render in like 2 or 4K or something as a texture to paint into, right? But if it's something like this, like honestly, you don't even need this big of an image. That's over. And the reason you don't want to go too big of an image is that the higher you go, the longer your render is going to take, because Blender will have to load that texture in into the like the memory basically to render with it. It's also going to be slower to work with whilst you're creating shaders and everything else. So you want to try to keep things light. And for something like this, we really don't need much at all. We don't even need the default, which is usually pretty low. I'm going to halve this. So, which, by the way, I'm just clicking and dragging down so that I can change both of the values at the same time. And I want to halve it. And the easiest way to halve it is to do the math in the field, which is a cool thing that Blender lets you do. So if I add in /, that's divide by, and then number 2, and then I hit enter, it's now halved it, basically. So it's now 512. And by the way, why don't you just like type in like 500, like why 512? 512 seems like an odd number. It's one of those like, you know, computer technical things. It's like keeping it to the power of 2, I believe. It just makes it easier for it to process and store the information or like render it in the correct space. I don't know. Honestly, I haven't looked into it too much. I've been using Blender for 15 years, but it's best to try to keep it with it. You know, it's like the memory of the computer. It's like 128, 256, 512, 124, etc. You kind of go in that. I don't know. Maybe the nerds just insult you. The mathematical or the computer people, maybe you can reply in the comments what it actually is for. But anyways, just divide it by 2. I'm going to go 512. Now the base color, you could change it later on when we actually start painting, but just to make it easier, I'll just do it now. I'll set a sort of a base color of a donut. So something around about a value of a 0.8, saturation of around about a 0.6, something like that. I'll set a sort of a base color of a donut. So something around about a value of a 0.8, saturation of around about a 0.6, something like that. I'll go with that. And then the name, which I could also change later, but I'll name it now. Donut base. I don't need alpha, and then I'm going to hit OK. Haha. So if this is that color is the same as this color, then it would just be doing like nothing would have changed right now because this is a solid image texture, which we can't see, right? But which we can't, like, I can't show you the image like on this view. But if we click on texture paint mode, you should see that it's shown up. Can't see, right? But which we can't, like, I can't show you the image like on this view. But if we click on texture paint mode, you should see that it's shown up right here. When you click to texture paint mode, it should show you by default. This is the properties here. But if you click on active tool there, active tool, which it's always just visible, I believe, and it's always the active tool. And because we are in texture paint mode on our object, it's now showing us the texture paint. So it's saying where are you painting into, and it's painting into our donut base, and it's always the active tool. And because we are in texture paint mode on our object, it's now showing us the texture paint. So it's saying where are you painting into, and it's painting into our donut base texture. And over here on the left hand side, you should see the solid color, which is the new image which we've created. If you can't see it, just select it over here and it should show up. Okay, now if I was to change this color to be something and just paint, you can see I'm painting onto my model, and you should also see it showing up on your image texture over there. Okay, now where is it, like, because the other thing you can do is you can change I mean, it's normally automatically set to this, but in my case it's not. I want to change to paint mode, and then I could actually paint directly over here as well. So this is again sort of talking about the image coordinates. To take a texture and a 2D flat texture and map it onto a 3D model, it has to wrap it in some way according to texture coordinates. So this coordinates that we're using right now is the UV map. So if I was to actually go into edit mode, just go to edit mode right here, you can see these are my image, whatever, my mesh, right? And it's created this grid here. So each of these single grids, in fact, if I was to switch, don't do this, I'm just doing it so I can show you, and then go to sync mode, right? If I was to select different parts of this mesh, these are my image, whatever, my mesh. So this coordinates that we're using right now is the UV map. So if I was to actually go into edit mode, just go to edit mode right here, you can see these are my image, whatever, my mesh, right? And it's created this grid here. So each of these single grids, in fact, if I was to switch, don't do this, I'm just doing it so I can show you, and then go to sync mode, right? If I was to select different parts of this mesh, you can see which parts it actually correlates with on the image texture. There's actually a great image on Twitter. I'll paste it up here so you can see it. But it's it was like the best way to explain UV coordinates to like a toddler even is like a Christmas ornament, like a chocolate of a Christmas like little Santa thing. It's the exact same thing. It's taking a 2D thing and then it is wrapping it around the model. So that is what it's doing. So we're painting onto a 2D texture, which is then being mapped onto it. So you could paint over here, or you could paint onto your model. It's generally much easier to paint onto the model, and that's what we're going to do. So I will, what view am I in? Yeah, let's go. Okay, image editor, paint mode, and then texture paint mode. Okay, and then this is turned on again. I gotta turn that off. Okay, display. I don't want the image texture. Okay, all right, and then I want to change the fill thing. For some reason, it sets it as white. I don't know. And then I'll just click, single click, and now I've got my my donut base there. Solid color base, I mean. All right. Now, if I was to set this to a white color, and let's go, yeah, 0.8, 0.8 will be fine. And then I'll set it to kind of like a low strength. And I don't have, I've got a Cintiq sitting right next to me, but I will not use it because instead I'm going to click like this, just like you guys are with your little mouse. But obviously, if you've got a stylus, then it's much better because you've got pen pressure. You don't have to do as many clicks. Click, 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 click. But yeah, I'm painting around the middle part, and you can see that it's reflected over there. I could also paint across here. I could set my brush strength. And the brush strength, same hotkey as we did with sculpting, it's F to change your, your size, not strength. Size is F, and then strength is Shift F, which is the exact same hotkeys as sculpting, which is nice. It's a nice thing that Blender does. It tries to use the, whoa, you see that little thing that just popped up there? That was like one of my scripts, my add-ons that I've got enabled, just had a fit right then for some reason. I don't know why. But that's third-party add-ons. You know, you get what you get. Sometimes it'll just have a hizzy fit. But anyways, yeah, one of the good things about Blender is like the hotkeys are generally consistent. Like G for grab and S and scale and rotate. You can even do that. You can do that everywhere. Like for nodes, like, yeah, I didn't even show you, but like, yeah, you could like take these and like scale them with S and rotate them. It's like, why would you need to rotate? But like you can, like all of the hotkeys are the same everywhere in Blender. It's really nice actually that they've done that. Unlike Adobe, looking at you, try and go from like Adobe to Illustrator, and it's like, what? Like the pen tools are different, and like everything's got a different. It just drove me crazy. Anyways, by the way, if you hit X, that is a hotkey from Photoshop. I know I just bad-mouthed Adobe, but there's a hotkey from Adobe of Photoshop. It's the same here. We'll just swap between two like a foreground and background color. So I want to keep white, but then I want to make this one my donut color. So I'm going to click this, click the eyedropper, click that, and now I could like quickly swap. Like if this part looks too white to me, I can do some brownish painting, and then if this part I want to make it white, I can just hit X and do that. So the reason I'm doing this like sort of staggered thing is this is kind of how it looks. I mean, that looks like solid white. I think that was like a homemade recipe, but this one I've just looked in other photos, and it seems to be not a constant color that goes all around it. It's sort of like splotchy. There'll be. So the reason I'm doing, click the eyedropper, click that, and now I could like quickly swap. Like if this part looks too white to me, I can do some brownish painting, and then if this part I want to make it white, I can just hit X and do that. And it's like, what? Scale them with, there's a hotkeeper, click that, and different, like you could like take these and like scale them with S and rotate them. It's like, why would you need to rotate? But like you can, like all of the hotkeys are the same everywhere in Blender. It's really nice actually that they've done that. Unlike Adobe, looking at you, try and go from like Adobe to Illustrator, and it's like, what? Like the pen tools are different, and like everything's got a different. It just drove me crazy. Anyways, by the way, if you hit X, that is a hotkey from Photoshop. I know I just bad-mouthed Adobe, but there's a hotkey from Adobe of Photoshop. It's the same here. We'll just swap between two like a foreground and background color. So I want to keep white, but then I want to make this one my donut color. So I'm going to click this, click the eyedropper, click that, and now I could like quickly swap. Like if this part looks too white to me, I can do some brownish painting, and then if this part I want to make it white, I can just hit X and do that. So the reason I'm doing this like sort of staggered thing is this is kind of how it looks. I mean, that looks like solid white. I think that was like a homemade recipe, but this one I've just looked in other photos, and it seems to be not a constant color that goes all around it. It's sort of like splotchy. There'll be parts that'll have more, and parts that'll have less. Not sure if you can hear, but yeah, there's a crow that's just going ape outside. I like rented my office, my little studio here, and it's just a residential block, and I'm like, I have to make sure there's no like barking dog next door because that'll just like ruin tutorials. And I'm like, all right, dogs are cool. All right, everybody seems cool. Okay, I'm gonna do it. And then I like move in, Didn't realize that like at odd times throughout the day, it's just the trees around here, you just have birds fighting constantly and just barking at each other. So I just have to deal with it, or more like you have to deal with it. But I don't even know if you can hear it. It's hard to understand what the microphone will pick up. All right, so that's pretty good. All right, not bad. Cool. We got a thing. All right. Now, one thing to note is when you do texture painting on a texture that you have created in Blender, or you've altered or modified in Blender, you can see that on this image thing up here, you've got a little star. And that star means that this image is not actually saved yet. It's actually, it's only visible in your current blend session, right, temporarily. If you were to actually quit right now, which I'll just do something dangerous and say quit, it'll say, do you want to save your changes first of all for your blend file, but also do you want to save your modified images? Actually quit right now, which I'll just do something dangerous and say really saved yet. It's actually, it's only visible in your current blend session, right, temporarily. If you were to actually quit right now, which I'll just do something dangerous and say quit, it'll say, do you want to save your changes first of all for your blend file, but also do you want to save your modified images? That's a new feature of Blender, by the way. Never used to have that. So it used to be all the time people would paint something in Blender and then they would go, wow, that's loud. They would say, what happened to my texture? Like, why is it not in the thing? It's like, yeah, you didn't save it. So you want to save your texture. So you want to go save or save as, and it will then say, where do you actually want to, where do you want to save it? Okay, so let's save it right here. I'll call this, yeah, donut base. Let's do that. And now that little star there has gone. So that means now that if I was to exit, it doesn't matter because this thing has happened. If I was to do another little paint session here, the star has appeared again because it hasn't saved it. So the hotkey to save just the image texture, it's Alt-S. Do that, and it's now saved over the image. All right, so back at my shader over here. I like the way this looks, but I want to also use parts of my noise texture, which is what I had before, because I want to have that, this look, right? Where I've got that kind of browny, white, yellowy parts where it's all kind of like splotchy across it. Like it's been sitting in a fryer, kind of uneven. I feel like the more like commercial, because I've looked at so many donut references, the more commercial the donut operation, the more uniform and plain your donuts will appear. But if you're like doing homemade donuts or like artisanal donuts, I'm sure that's a thing now, you'll get like more interesting shapes and things. So anyways, take that as you will. All right, so what I want to do is I want to take the output of my noise texture and somehow infuse it with my base colors here. And the way that you do that is in this case, because it is not a, if you were combining two shaders, which is a whole, you know, shaders, whatever, you would do it with a mix shader and you would get two inputs, which is a green. So you would take the green into the green, blah, 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 you know, shaders, whatever. You would do it with a mix shader and you would get two inputs, which is a green. So you would take the green into the green, blah, blah, blah. What we want to do is combine two yellow, like the color of this tells you what sort of information it's being transported across. I want to take this grayscale and this yellow, which is basically just color information, and I want to combine them. So what I need is another node called a add color mix RGB. So if I take this mix RGB, drop this in right here, and then take the output of my factor input and drop this into the bottom input right here. What this will do now is if if I set this factor amount here is showing which one do you want to show. If it's all the way to the left, it's showing just the top input. If it's all the way to the right, it's showing just the bottom input, okay? And it's a simple like opacity slider. It's like if it's in Photoshop and there's a layer above it and you're changing the opacity. That's all it is doing. This mix box type, whatever, that is just like Photoshop. It is a blend type. It's a blending mode, which is in invert order for some reason. There we go. Now it's the correct order. And that will take, basically it'll do the exact same thing that it would in Photoshop. So this is an overlay. If I want to take just the dark parts of my bottom input, then multiply is the one that I want. So that way it'll ignore all of the white areas, shader compilation, the downfall of Eevee. It'll ignore all the white areas and just use the dark values. So now that this bottom input just becomes the dark thing. The one that I actually want though is overlay. Overlay, similar to multiply, but it will also, as well as darkening areas, it will also add it. So if you look at just the add one, then it will do the opposite of the multiply. It will not darken, but it'll ignore the dark areas and only use the white areas. So overlay does both, kind of. It'll brighten it if it appears brighter than the texture underneath it, and it will darken it if it is darker than the texture underneath it. So the factor input there is like the strength of it, really. The strength of how much of this bottom input do you want to add as an overlay thing on top, basically. So all the way to 1 is way too high. I don't want to go that far, but I want to add some input to it. And in fact, I might change my scale of this to be a little bigger. That looks pretty nice, actually. And my recording just crashed because I ran out of disk space. I should have listened to that notification that popped up. But anyways, it's a matter of just tinkering until you're happy with the result. It's the joy of 3D. You can just pull up your reference and, side by side and go, do I want something like that? Or do I want something like this? And what can I do to try to improve it? But this is a, pretty basic setup, but you can sort of get a feel now for how nodes work, right? We've got an image texture that's being added with a procedural one combined into a base color, and then that same procedural one is also driving bump and reading left to right. We can see how our shader is made up of. All these values that don't have anything plugged into them are obviously just values. If I wanted to, I could also make like this roughness. I could take the output of my noise texture and make it apply to my roughness as well. So I would have what looks like, well, we'll see once the shaders compilation finishes. Not much, actually, but there should be some parts that look kind of like smudges. That's kind of a way to make a smudge map, basically. You'll have parts that will look more diffuse, like more matte, and then other parts that'll look glossy, and you could like exaggerate it with a color ramp. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here and just mucking around, but you can see how valuable nodes are and why before nodes, oh, it was tough times back in my day of Blender. There you go. You got what looks like puddles all over your donut now, just by making this noise texture go into the roughness thing. You can do a lot with it. Nodes are, and why before ahead of myself here and just mucking around, but you can see how valuable nodes are, and why before nodes, oh, it was tough times back in my day of Blender. There you go. You got what looks like puddles all over your donut now, just by making this noise texture go into the roughness thing. You can do a lot with it. But that's it. That'll do it for this part. So go ahead, click on the screen here to join me in the next part of our donut series. And I won't announce it just in case it changes again. I'll see you there. So we want to add some sprinkles to our donut, and obviously manually placing them by hand would be absolutely mad. And the previous method, which would be to use particles, which is what I taught from my old donut tutorial series, that's glitchy, it's outdated, and thank goodness we don't have to touch it because there is a new and better, amazing geometry nodes, which in the name kind of tells you a little bit about what it does, similar to what we just covered. Nodes, similar to material nodes. Geometry nodes lets you combine things, take this value, put it into that value, and then create new things, but for geometry, as in the actual mesh, the objects that are going on in your scene. It's really, really powerful. It's almost hard to overstate just how powerful it is. Because, for example, you could make a building, one building that has controls for the size of the building that changes depending on the number of floors it has, and then you've got like infinite variations. Or you could create a geometry node system for power poles, right? So that they dynamically link together, and then when they get close to a building, it like attaches it there. Or you could make icicles dynamically appear on objects the closer they get together. Not to mention all the crazy stuff that it enables for animation and motion graphics. And that's just getting started. Like, this feature was only introduced very recently, and it's already enabling so much. By the way, speaking of which, brief pause for all of my fellow Blender users who learned geometry nodes when it was first introduced about 8 months ago for 2.92. Most of that's kind of redundant now because they have updated geometry nodes to a new fields-based system, and it's much easier to use. Don't get me wrong, it was the right decision, but it's surprising that it happened so soon after they just first introduced it. So I did a tutorial on it, and now that tutorial is kind of outdated. Shame for me. But anyways, I'm going to show you the new method. It is easier for everyone to use, and it's good that they did it. But anyways, let's get to it. So you want to obviously select the object you want to have the sprinkles scattered on, which is our icing. And to access geometry nodes, you could do it a couple of ways. One would be to split your view and then change this new view to the geometry node editor. But I instead prefer to create a workspace for it. So if you click the, because there's not one here by default, if you click the little plus icon, then go general, there is one that you can enable called geometry nodes. So here by default, if you click the little plus icon, then go general, there is one that you can enable called geometry nodes. So click that, and now we've got this extra one at the top there for geometry nodes. I'm going to move this over. Oh, you can't actually move it. And to access geometry nodes, you could do it a couple of ways. One would be to split your view and then change this new view to the geometry node editor. But I instead prefer to create a workspace for it. So if you click the, because there's not one here by default, if you click the little plus icon, then go general, there is one that you can enable called geometry nodes. So click that, and now we've got this extra one at the top there for geometry nodes. I'm going to move this over. Oh, you can't actually move it over. Yeah, how about that? I just assumed that you could. I don't think I've ever tried to do that in Blender. All right, well, it's over on the right-hand side. I know where it is. And you can see it's split and arranged our windows. I don't want this one at the top here. This is like a spreadsheet for your vertices and stuff going on in the scene. Bit too advanced, more advanced than what we need it for. So I'm just going to merge it across, which again you do by going to the top left-hand corner, click and drag across until it merges. Okay, so there's this big part at the bottom here. This is our geometry nodes editor. You want to click on new. Aha. So when you do this, you will notice that yes, we've now got a node editor here to play with. But also in the right-hand side on the modifier stack, you can see that we've got this new modifier here for geometry nodes. So in order to use geometry nodes, it has to be a modifier. And you will only see what is displayed here in your geometry nodes on the selected modifier. So you can see there's a faint outline around this modifier. If I was to click off this and click on the subdivision right there, this has disappeared. Okay, so that's, if you've ever lost the geometry nodes, you're like, what happened? It used to be, just click the modifier. If you click the little pin button, that will ensure that it will always be there. So if you click off it, it doesn't matter. So if you've only got one system, I usually just click the little pin icon and it just makes it easier. Anyways, so similar to our shader, right? It works left to right. But what is interesting in this case is that we've got an input. Okay, we've got the geometry, and then that is being fed over to the right-hand side to the geometry output, okay? The reason for that is that we've got mesh to start with. We've got all of this mesh info. So it's saying take this geometry data and then put that out over here, and then that is going to be the resulting mesh. So whatever we put in this middle section here is going to result in the output mesh. As a very, very basic example, I'm just going to type in, I can't actually remember. There's so many nodes, it's hard to remember where they are. So whatever we put in this middle section here is going to result in the output mesh. As a very, very basic example, I'm just going to type in, I can't actually remember. There's so many nodes, it's hard to remember where they are, but I'll just say set position. So I'll put this in here, and then let's offset this by 5 centimeters. Okay, so I have taken my icing, which is still there. The mesh, the original mesh data is what it started with, and then it changed its position, moved it up 5 centimeters, and now it's output there. Okay. So, I mean, I could animate this value. I could make this value be driven by something else. You can see how the possibilities, maybe. It's pretty cool. Right, so that's the example. So we want to scatter something over our mesh. And if you hit Shift A, or just go to Add, you'll see a whole string of different things here. And look, learning them one by one, I think that's the wrong way to learn things, in my opinion. I think it's best to follow tutorials, see what it is you're trying to do, and then just pick up the nodes as you go, and you'll eventually have learned so much that it's like you've learned them one by one, but you'll have actually got some context for where it's actually used. So the one that you're looking for in this case is underneath point, distribute points on faces. Okay, so if I select that and I drop this in right here, depending on what you've got, because you might actually see like a big point, a big dot appearing. But if you don't, in this case, we've got 0. It is actually creating points on our icing, but the density is so low for the scale of our donut that we're not seeing it. If I increased my density, I would see we've got points. Now, the reason these points are so ginormous is that we're working on a 10 centimeter scale for our donut, and so it's created really, really large points. I would hope at some point in the future, Blender has a display option for how big those points are, but for now it does not. You could change it with an extra node, but look, we don't need to because we're gonna add an object later on. But all this is to say is that it is actually there. Now, one thing you will notice is that our icing has actually disappeared. Okay, if you go into edit mode, it's still there, but in object mode, it is not. And that's because we said geometry input, convert it into points, and then that is going to be the geometry. We don't want that. We want our points and our geometry. So what you need to do is add in a geometry join geometry node, and you'll use that one all the time. We're going to take that, put that in there, and then take our output from our original mesh and then put that in there. So now we've got points as well as our original icing underneath it. Okay, so these points, as you can see, they're just blobs, and this is just a viewport representation of what it is. It's just like it's data that Blender is seeing. It's little tiny things that do not exist. If you were to render it, you would not actually see anything. You just see your original donut because it's not using these points anywhere. So what we need to do is we need to, well, first of all, we need to have an object for this to replace our points. So let's set our density to 0 just so that we can actually not see those ginormous points blocking our view. And we want to model the object that we want to be placed on our icing there, which is a sprinkle. And there's various types of sprinkles. We're going to go for the most common one, which is based off a what shape? A cylinder. So Shift A, I'm going to add in. This is a new object, so it's not in edit mode or anything like that. New object, cylinder. Now when you do that, again, scale of Blender, thinks we're working at like 10 meters scale or something. We can just turn that all the way down to its like absolute smallest size, to like down here, and it's like almost the right size, but yeah. And then the vertice count, because this is going to be scattered all over our donut. You can see the number of like faces on there. It's quite a lot. That's a very detailed singular sprinkle. We don't need that much. So I'm going to set that to instead 8. All right. So now I've got that. Let's just move this to the side here. Move this up, and I'm just going to increase the scale of the x-axis, sorry, the z-axis, so S, Z, just so that I can just roughly get about the size size of the sprinkle, and I'll also just scale it just S without any axes, just so that I can make it a little bit bigger. And that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now with my icing here selected, I am going to, between here and here, where it joins in, we're going to create our, we're going to start referencing this new cylinder as our sprinkle. So you'd think it would be under points, but it's actually under instances. So instances, this is a word, yeah, it's just under instances. We'll talk about it later. Under instances. And there's two here that I always get them confused. Instances on points or instances to points. And the one we're looking for is instance on points. And I always get them confused. It's, I don't know. I think they got to come up with a different name to like delineate properly. Yeah, it's. I always click the wrong one. But we're creating points, and so therefore we want to put an instance, which is going to be an object that is like referenced fast, like it can like stream it essentially without loading in the data 1,000 times. That's what an instance is. Yeah, so we're putting that instance on our points. Okay, so we've got this node here. And now this instance, whatever we put in this instance is going to be our points, essentially. So if we were to actually select our cylinder up here in our outliner, and if we were to just drag this over to our geometry nodes thing, look what it does. It creates an object info node with our cylinder selected. Another way to access that would be underneath input object info right there if you happen to lose it. But that's a really short and easy way to just click, drag it across, and now I've got it selected there. And if I take the geometry from that and then put that into the instance of that, we won't see anything because our density is set to nothing, basically. Now you can see something's happening. We've got cylinders, little tiny cylinders selected there. Input object info right there if you happen to lose it. But that's a really short and easy way to just click, drag it across, and now I've got it selected there. And if I take the geometry from that and then put that into the instance of that, we won't see anything because our density is set to nothing, basically. Now you can see something's happening. We've got cylinders, little tiny cylinders appearing on our icing. Now, these cylinders are looking really short and stubby. What's going on? This comes back to that problem that if you watched the whole series from the start, you'll know that when you scale and do things, and when I was scaling this, what it did was it changed the scale of this object here. And that's kind of, it's not been applied to the object data yet, essentially. So what you need to do first is hit Control A and then apply scale. And now yeah, and that's kind of from the start, you'll know that when you scale and do things, and when I was scaling this, what it did was it changed the scale of this object here. And that's kind of, it's not been applied to the object data yet, essentially. So what you need to do first is hit Control A and then apply scale. And now it's actually referencing the object correctly. Okay. So far so good. It is rotating it though the wrong way because it's rotating it upwards because that's how this cylinder looks. So I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis. So Rx, and then you can see in the top left-hand corner, that'll actually give you the rotation amount. And I want to go for exactly minus 90 degrees. And you could actually type it in by hitting minus 90, and then you'll get that. Or another way is to just hold down Control, and then it will snap it to the nearest 5-degree increments. So that's a way that you can rotate something to an exact axis or an exact amount, basically. So now I've done that, nothing has changed because, upwards because that's how this cylinder looks. So I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis. So Rx, and then you can see in the top left-hand corner, that'll actually give you the rotation amount. And I want to go for exactly minus 90 degrees. And you could actually type it in by hitting minus 90, and then you'll get that. Or another way is to just hold down Control, and then it will snap it to the nearest 5-degree increments. So that's a way that you can rotate something to an exact axis or an exact amount, basically. So now I've done that, nothing has changed because again, we've now changed the rotation here, but it hasn't really applied to the object. So I need to apply it, Control A, rotation. Haha. Okay, so now something's happening. I'm going to increase the density here so that we can see more of our sprinkles. Okay, things are getting better, but you can see now we've got another problem where it's like it looks okay at the top, but down here, it's now jutting into it like that. So that's because what we needed to do is to follow the rotation of these faces down here, not use this blanket value across the whole thing, but follow the rotation of the faces. So, and this is where, you know, a lot of people find geometry nodes is very complicated and complex, and it is. It does kind of change your workflow from being like a canvas tool, like an artist, to kind of thinking more mathematically. But what we've got here is distributing points. So we're creating points, and each of those points could have a rotation based on the face, right? So each of these individual points before them, with their little like blotchy shapes, they have a rotation applied to them. So if we took that rotation from the face and put that into here, which is our instances, now it's actually matching the rotation of the face. So it's kind of wrapping around it, which is really cool. It's what we want. So let's increase our density here. And you have to use really high values here because we're working at such a small scale. So this density value, if you were making a, let's say like a grass or something across here, right? Like working at like 2 meters, right? They have a rotation applied to them. So if we took that rotation from the face and put that into here, which is our instances, now it's actually matching the rotation of the face. So it's kind of wrapping around it, which is really cool. It's what we want. So let's increase our density here. And you have to use really high values here because we're working at such a small scale. So this density value, if you were making a, let's say like a grass or something across here, right? Like working at like 2 meters, right? Let's say, or like a human scale, right? You would need to use far, far less, you know, maybe 50 if you want like 50 scattered rocks across here. It's essentially, what is it? It's density per meter. And because we're working at like 10 centimeters, a tenth of that, is like we have to really crank this up to get, you know, if we want 90 sprinkles on our donut or something, I guess we have to go 9,000, something like that. Anyways, we just have to use really, really large amounts. All right, now, once you start adding, once you get to, yeah, let's go 50,000. I'll show you how to make this easy. I'm just doing it progressively so you can understand things. But yeah, let's go 50,000. You can see that, okay, it's cool. But like, okay, now our rotation looks silly because it's following it like it's made of straw. It's like all combed into it. Whereas really we want each of these points to individually rotate, still apply to the face so they're not like jutting out crazy, but rotate around it. So between here and here, this rotation value we need to tweak. So again, you're not to know, or you'd never guess what node to use. It's one of those things you can only learn from tutorials. But the node that we're looking for, Shift A, is underneath Utilities, and we're looking for Rotate Euler. Is that how you pronounce that word? Euler? Node to use. It's one of those things you can only learn from tutorials. But the node that we're looking for, Shift A, is underneath Utilities, and we're looking for Rotate Euler. Is that how you pronounce that word? Euler?
Euler. Euler.
Come on, no way.
Euler.
Wow.
Euler.
Euler? Leonhard Euler. All right, that is wild. That's why. All right, he's Swiss. Basel, Swiss. All right, cool, man. Euler is how we're supposed to pronounce your name, but you're dead, so Euler is. I'm going with Euler. It makes more sense to me. It's got an E and a U and an L and an ER. Euler. No, Euler. Euler. All right. So we drop this in here, making sure it's in the rotation. And now we can tweak it. So if we hit rotate by, and we just like, rotate on one of these values here, you can see that we're rotating it on that specific axis. And look, we're getting some weird looking effects. Okay. The axis that we want to use is the Z axis because we're looking top down. So hit the little Z thing up there. We want to rotate along this axis. Okay. So if we just increase this, you would see that we're rotating it, but it's not actually on the right axis. Like something weird's going on. And that's because by default base orientation is object, which I guess is the orientation of this object, but we want it to be local. And now it is local, I believe, to this sprinkle. That's my understanding of it. Whatever, could be wrong, but that's fine. Cool, so that's good. Now, you can see that we're rotating it, but they're all getting the exact same value. So we want to add basically randomness to this single value there. And the node for that, let me just move this up here so we're a little cleaner and easier to understand, is just type in search, and it is random value. This is one you will use all the time because it is very, very common when you're making something, you want to have random values for each new iteration or point or whatever. So this will generate a random value, and there's a number of ways to do it. The default is float, which means just basically a single number, and it'll give you something between 0 and 1, okay? Now, if I was to take this and put this into here, you can see that it is working. It's rotating each of those points on its own individual axes. But yeah, it's on all axes. So all the axes are getting a random value between 0 and 30. And it's not what we want. It's a little bit mashed up. So what we want to do is change it from float to vector. So vector, and this is where some people go like, oh, geometry nodes, it's too complex. I get it. Like vector, right? What is a vector? It's 3 axes, okay? Your X, your Y, and your Z, your X, your Y, and your Z. So it's just like this, 0 to 30, but we've got it for each individual axis, which is exactly what we want. So if we were to put this into here, rotate by, now it's generating on 0 to 1, but we can say not the X and not the Y axes, just the Z axis. All right, so it's working. Each point is getting their own individual rotation. It's adhering to the direction of the icing, but it's not fully rotated, right? Something's going on. That's because this value here. We need to increase this, and you'd think like 360, right? Because 360 degrees. And I was actually confused by this because it looks like, yeah, like it's already rotating like way more than, 360 degrees. This is actually a radian. Like this is degree because it's got the little degree thing there. This is a radian value, which is, I guess like a single, it's like, actually, I spoke to Erindale, who is a guy who really knows his geometry nodes, paid for some of his time to just ask him a load of questions. But basically a radian, it's like pi, In fact, if you type in pi, P-I, you'll get the value, 3.142. That'll give you 180 degrees because it's like half the circle. This is where I like blanked out in math in class. I just like, all right, what do I need to do to like pass the test? but he evidently knows what he's talking about. It's double pi because it needs to be more than 180. It needs to be 360. So it's double pi, I discovered, is tau, T-A-U. If you type that in, it's double pi. And that's all the value you need. Like, so basically, I mean, you don't have to remember like to type in tau for the thing. It just, anything more than 6 will give you the correct thing because it just has to be more than 360. So stop the sprinkles from appearing in place 6. We'll have to remember like to type in, just has to be more than 360. So that was all to explain that, yeah, basically why, oh gosh, how many times am I going to try it? Yeah, that's all you need to know. Okay, so we've got a random value. Good. It's working. Things are working. Great. Cool. All right, the next thing to solve is how do we stop the sprinkles from appearing in places where they should not, right? We don't want it on these globbity bits, places where, okay. Gosh, more than 360. So that was all to explain that, yeah, basically why, oh gosh, how many times am I going to try it? Yeah, that's all you need to know. Okay, so we've got a random value. Good. It's working. Things are working. Great. Cool. All right, the next thing to solve is how do we stop the sprinkles from appearing in places where they should not, right? We don't want it on these globbity bits, and we also don't want it underneath the icing, which is what's happening. It's putting it on both axes. So what we need to do is do something called a weight paint. Okay, so if we select our icing and then hit Control-Tab, that brings up a pie menu here for the different modes. So we've already used edit mode. We've already used sculpt mode before, but there's one here, weight paint. Oh, I actually did it because I was practicing for this tutorial. I've already done it. When you do weight paint, it will automatically add in a vertex group to it. So a vertex group is, it's basically like a value of between 0 and 1 for each individual point on your mesh, and you basically paint it in. Now it's covered in sprinkles right now, so I'm going to go to my modifier stack, and as we learned before, this little button here will disable a modifier from your viewport only, and this one would disable it from your render, but yeah, just viewport, turn it off. Now it's covered in sprinkles right now, so I'm going to go to my modifier stack, and as we learned before, this little button here will disable a modifier from your viewport only, and this one would disable it from your render, but yeah, just viewport, turn it off. Okay, so if I was to now just paint on here, whoops, by default it would be this. Hey, why are you back again? It's painting what looks like a heat map, okay? So the way this works in weight paint, dark blue is a value of 0, red is a value of 1, and then these other values are obviously leading up from there, like light blue, then green, then yellow, and then red to be all the way to 1, okay? So we want to paint, essentially, where do we want our sprinkles to go? Okay, so I'm going to change the size, I'll change my weight paint, so that's Control F. Same hotkeys as before for texture paint and sculpting. F to change the size of your brush, and then Control F to change the weight in this case. All right, so I don't want it on those inner parts. I definitely don't want it down here like that. So just where it could logically actually appear. And then the other thing I'll do, because this is where you sort of get a little bit artistic, but yeah, you don't want to have like constant values anywhere. So I'm just going to use like single clicks to just say like no sprinkles here or less sprinkles, right? So I'm giving a lower strength value. And then I'll just do a few little, it just makes it, yeah, it just makes what you're creating look more interesting when you've got something that is a little bit more unpredictable. Yeah, you don't want to have like constant values anywhere. So I'm just going to use like single clicks to just say like no sprinkles here or less sprinkles, right? So I'm giving a lower strength value. And then I'll just do a few little, it just makes it, yeah, it just makes what you're creating look more interesting when you've got something that is a little bit more unpredictable than what you would get normally. Okay, so once I finish weight painting, hit Control Tab again, and then go back to object mode. You could also just do it up here, by the way. Okay, let's turn on our geometry nodes. So how do I get that reflected on my mesh? How do I use that vertex group, which by the way, we might as well rename it, sprinkles density. How do I use that in my density right here? Now, I was asking Arundel about this. I imagine at some point there would be a node that you could reference the weight paint group. At the moment, this is the only way to do it. We drag this value into this blank input down here of our group input, okay? Now, what this does, this is actually a really handy thing, not just for this, but for anything. This is exposing a value. When we take something from here and we put it into one of these blank things, what it's also doing is it's putting, we might as well read and what you would get normally. Okay, so once I finish weight painting, hit Control Tab again, and then go back to object mode. You could also just do it up here, by the way. Okay, let's turn on our geometry nodes. So how do I get that reflected on my mesh? How do I use that vertex group, which by the way, we might as well rename it, sprinkles density. How do I use that in my density right here? Now, I was asking Arundel about this. I imagine at some point there would be a node that you could reference the weight paint group. At the moment, this is the only way to do it. We drag this value into this blank input down here of our group input, okay? Now, what this does, this is actually a really handy thing, not just for this, but for anything. This is exposing a value. So how do I get that reflected on my mesh? How do I use that vertex group, which by the way, we might as well rename it, sprinkles density. How do I use that in my density right here? Now, I was asking Arundel about this. I imagine at some point there would be a node that you could reference the weight paint group. At the moment, this is the only way to do it. We drag this value into this blank input down here of our group input. Okay. Now what this does, this is actually a really handy thing, not just for this, but for anything. This is exposing a value. When we take something from here and we put it into one of these blank things, what it's also doing is it's putting that value over here in your modifier stack. So now I've got access to that density value over here so that I don't do it. We drag this value into this blank input down here of our group input. Okay. Now what this does, this is actually a really handy thing, not just for this, but for anything. This is exposing a value. When we take something from here and we put it into one of these blank things, what it's also doing is it's putting that value over here in your modifier stack. So now I've got access to that density value over here so that I don't have to jump to my geometry nodes. If I want to change the density of my sprinkles later on, I can just play with it right here without having to open up the full thing, right? Really handy. Next to it is a box, and this is the box that is important. It is the weight paint box, or the vertex group, or is it, maybe it's just any attribute. Anyways, you'll see that if I click that little thing, it changes from a number to basically a text field, and then you can reference different attributes of the object. The one that we're looking for, of course, is the one that we have called sprinkles density. All right, now when I did that, what exactly happened? Nothing. And that is because it has assigned a value of 0 to 1. Okay, whereas previously, before, we were using values of 50,000. So I would need to convert my 0 to 1 to a 50,000 thing, which I could do with a math node. Okay, so that was utility, math. Set this to multiply, and then put this in here. And then if I added in 50,000, now I would get that only appearing where it needs to be. Ta-da! Isn't that great? So, and then if I wanted to, I could also take this value and plug this in over here. And then now this controls my density, right? It's my exposed density of this thing. Oh, and it's also, yeah, I guess it's got a maximum. I mean, this is the other thing. Like, we're going to change this in a second because there's another problem that we've now got. Okay, so it looks cool, but how do we stop the clipping? Clipping. Each of these sprinkles is intersecting with other sprinkles. How on earth can we fix it? Well, we couldn't previously with particle nodes. We were just out of luck. We would have to just play with this seed value. The seed value, by the way, if you're not aware, it's just a single value that it's infinite variations. So if you don't like the orientation, the distribution, you could just hit this until you find something that you like. And that was my advice for the previous particle nodes. And it will still be my advice, but there is something that will help us right here. This is the first instance where we've got an advantage over particles. It's not just random distribution, but something called Poisson disk distribution. Poisson? There's no W in it, but I was told that that's how you say it. I guess it's French. When we maximum, I mean, this is the other thing. Like, we're going to change this in a second because there's another problem that we've now got. Okay, so it looks cool, but how do we stop the clipping? Clipping. Each of these sprinkles is intersecting with other sprinkles. How on earth can we fix it? Well, we couldn't previously with particle nodes. We were just out of luck. We would have to just play with this seed value. The seed value, by the way, if you're not aware, it's just a single value that it's infinite variations. So if you don't like the orientation, the distribution, you could just hit this until you find something that you like. And that was my advice for the previous particle nodes. And it will still be my advice, but there is something that will help us right here. This is is the first instance where we've got an advantage over particles. It's not just random distribution, but something called Poisson disk distribution. Poisson. There's no W in it, but I was told that that's how you say it. I guess it's French. When we use this, okay, first of all, we've lost something, okay? We've got some new, so let's just talk about this a little bit. Okay, so we've got, by default, it'll be set to 0, and the density max is probably set to, I think, 10. That's probably what yours is. But if we set this to 50,000, that is now identical to the random distribution, okay? So random, Poisson disk, density max is the exact same thing as your density value. What Poisson disk gives us as an addition is something called distance min. And the way this works is each of these